Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
The windier it gets, the more nervous I get.
Power outages, canceled ferries. A powerful windstorm blasts the south coast. Also,
but the numbers are higher than what we would like to see.
5 deaths, 549 new cases of COVID-19 in BC over the Thanksgiving weekend. And
a massive fire burns all night at a plastic recycling plant in New Westminster.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Well, we are just half an hour away from the first debate of the BC election. The three main party leaders have arrived and will square off at 6:30 right here on CBC Vancouver for 90 minutes.
it's an opportunity for Green Party leader Sonia Furstenau, NDP Leader John Horgan, and Liberal leader Andrew Wilkinson to try to connect with voters in what has largely been an uneventful and virtual campaign. Good evening, and we will explore what's at stake in tonight's debate during this shortened newscast.
After a weekend of heavy criticism stemming from sexist comments made by one of its candidates, the BC Liberals releasing the party's election platform ahead of tonight's debate. Liberal leader Andrew Wilkinson says his plan will create jobs and bring investment back to the province. That includes eliminating the PST for a year, providing $10 a day daycare to low-income families, and spending $1 billion over 5 years to build better long-term care facilities for seniors. But Wilkinson says people should think about why we're having an election in the first place.
Despite having the confidence of the legislature in his agreement with the Green Party, despite having all three parties working together in a trusting relationship to fight back the virus, John Horgan selfishly decided to call an election. He broke the trust that the other parties had put in him to govern for a year to come to get us through this pandemic.
Meanwhile, in reaction to the Liberals' platform announcement, NDP candidate Selina Robinson is accusing the party of hiding tax breaks for the wealthy and planning cuts to essential services.
Andrew Wilkinson's plan, if he dared to give us the details right now, helps the people at the top. A platform should be a plan to make life better for people, not an attempt to change the channel after a bad weekend.
Both the NDP and Green Party released their platforms last week.
And while the BC Liberals tried to shift the spotlight onto their election platform today, it was overshadowed by ongoing controversy.
Let's bring in our provincial affairs reporter, Tanya Fletcher, for more on this. Tanya, this is the first time Andrew Wilkinson has publicly addressed a damning video released over the weekend.
Yeah, that's right. It's been 3 days already, and that means the pressure has been mounting on him to speak about it somewhere other than Twitter. That video was an online retirement roast for BC Liberal MLA Ralph Sultan, in case you missed it. That video was taken mid-September, but it first surfaced on Saturday, and in it, Jane Thornthwaite, who's running again on the North Shore, recounts stories about NDP MLA Bowen Ma. Take a look.
Bowen is, very pretty lady, and she knows that she's got it, and she knows how to get Ralph going. Bowen would be right next to him, cuddling, a little bit of cleavage there, and Ralph would be enthralled with her.
So Thornthwaite there and Andrew Wilkinson, who you saw at the bottom of that screen there, they both apologized on social media the next day. And then on Monday, there was nothing but silence as Wilkinson had no public events scheduled due to Thanksgiving. Well, today we finally heard from both of them in person. Here's Thornthwaite speaking about it at a candidates event online.
They were stupid and insensitive, and I'm embarrassed about it. And it just doesn't reflect who I am, and certainly doesn't reflect my record. I have reached out to Bowen, and I did get a text back that she got it, my message. She didn't pick up, but I did. And I just wanted to reiterate that I'm sorry. And yeah, there's no one more disappointed in my words than me.
And the NDP are trying to put this squarely on Wilkinson as leader, and so he voluntarily addressed it after he revealed his party's platform this morning, and then took several questions about it as well. He says he was embarrassed at the time that Jane was speaking, so he was asked why then, as leader, he didn't speak up at the time to stop it.
There was that sense of not wanting to ruin his evening, but at the same time being somewhat taken aback at what was coming out of Jane's mouth. And so as the remarks proceeded, many of us were increasingly embarrassed to the point of being appalled. But it's hard to stop the train in a social event when you don't know what the next words will be.
And so looking at how this will affect the BC Liberals through the rest of the campaign, Wilkinson desperately needs to change the channel on this conversation and not have this be a defining moment, but we'll see how prominent it is in tonight's leaders' debate. Anita, Mike?
We'll be watching. Tanya Fletcher live for us tonight. Thanks, Tanya. And another issue, of course, for all the parties, the fact that we are in a pandemic. Tonight's debate is one of the big opportunities for leaders to show themselves to the public.
So, what can we expect tonight? Well, to help answer that, we have live with us Gerald Beyer, Associate Professor of Political Science at UBC.
Gerald, what do you expect the candidates will focus on tonight?
Well, it is a leaders' debate, and so I think they will focus on each other to some degree. It's the opportunity both to kind of refamiliarize themselves with voters, to try to score some points against one another, and to try to articulate a philosophy, I think, that can distinguish the one from the other, because a lot of people are looking at what the leaders stand for, really, in helping to decide where they want to cast their vote.
Okay, and any predictions as to who may come out strong?
Well, I think everyone has a reason to kind of come out strong. I think one of the things that Horgan has been accused of in the past is kind of an ability to be a little bit more aggressive than he should be, and I think he'll try to change that tone a little bit. The last time that Wilkinson and Horgan met, it was in the PR referendum. I mean, they meet in the House of Court all the time, but I think a lot of people were turned off on that in that debate because there was a lot of kind of point scoring and almost sarcasm between them, and I think they'll want to avoid that. The addition, of course, in this debate is Sonia Furstenau, who has a real opportunity to reintroduce herself. She's a new leader for the party. She's been an MLA since 2017, but people may not be as familiar with her as they are with the other two leaders, and so she has a chance, I think, in a couple of ways. One, she can be steady. It's all upside in a sense for her because she can, be steady when these two men are kind of arguing, a la the presidential debates or something. But she can also get a chance in there to articulate something that the Greens are doing, get the chance to bring some of that into the conversation.
Gerald Beyer, thank you, and we will hear more from you later on tonight after the debate. You can stay tuned to us if you are watching this show right now for the leaders' debate. So that'll happen right after the show, and CBC's got you covered on radio and online for post-debate analysis and reaction from the leaders.
More than 70,000 people are without power tonight after a powerful windstorm battered the south coast.
As Tina Lovegreen shows us, with trees and power lines coming down, got a little dangerous for some.
Intense winds whipping through much of the south coast, bringing down with it trees.
I think it almost hit a guy walking by. It was pretty close to me.
Rocking sailboats and causing sailing delays and some cancellations for the smaller ferry crossings. Helen Turness got to the Tsawwassen terminal early to catch a ferry to Nanaimo.
The ferry was to go at what 12:45, and now it's going at 2:15, I believe, so an hour and a half later. So, well, what can you do? It's really windy. I'm just afraid they're going to cancel it again.
We've seen some incredibly strong winds, gusts of up to 90 kilometers an hour. That's causing power outages and downed trees.
In Chilliwack, a miracle that 3 people survived after a tree fell on their RV while they were driving down Highway 1. BC Hydro crews have been working since midnight to restore power to hundreds of thousands of residents.
We've seen tons of trees and branches come down onto our power lines, and it might be as quick as taking a branch off a line, but in other cases they have to restring and rewire power line, as well as replace damaged poles, which can take up to 4 to 8 hours.
With the storm still moving through the region, more power outages are likely, and some may be without power overnight. But then there are those who see an opportunity.
All the boaters are going, it's a wind warning. Oh no, we can't go. The kiters are going, yes, a wind warning. It's awesome.
And find brightness even on a stormy day. Tina Lovegreen, CBC News, Delta.
All right, let's bring in meteorologist Johanna Wagstaff now. We are looking at you, and obviously we can see it's still pretty windy out there tonight.
Yes, I will not blow away. We are not within warning criteria anymore. In fact, wind warnings are ending across the south coast. This storm is easing, as Tina mentioned, seeing wind gusts up to 90 kilometers per hour for parts of the south coast. Here in Metro Vancouver, we saw gusts to about 70 kilometers per hour, and I'd stay still coming in around 40 to 60 kilometers per hour tonight, but easing as we head into the overnight period. We're also seeing some pretty dramatic but clearing skies. So looking at a much calmer forecast for the overnight and into your Wednesday. All of the full details, and we'll see what my hair looks like coming up.
It always looks good. Don't worry, Johanna. Another massive fire in New Westminster has destroyed a plastic recycling facility. The flames could be seen kilometers away, with thick black smoke filling the air. It started just after 7 last night in the Queensborough area. The city of New Westminster is asking people who live nearby to close windows in order to keep the smoke out. This is the second major fire in New Westminster in a month. In September, a fire caused extensive damage to the city's Pier Park. That fire burned for more than a week before it was finally extinguished.
And tonight, word that charges have now been laid against a BC man in connection with that pier fire. 49-year-old Sean Warnick is accused of arson, damaging property, and mischief to property over $5,000. He was arrested September 17th. The historic pier was part of New Westminster's chief waterfront recreational attractions. New Westminster Mayor Jonathan Cote says it'll take years and tens of millions of dollars to rebuild the site.
An Indigenous BC's man's fight to clear his name began in the province's top court today.
37 years after his conviction for sexual assault and murder, Philip Tallio blames bad legal advice and questionable police tactics.
Briar Stewart now on day one of a very complex case.
Nearly 4 decades after Philip Tallio first pleaded guilty comes his appeal.
It is the culmination of many, many years of work, and for Philip, over 37 years since his conviction. So it is a very, very big day.
Back in 1983, 17-year-old Tallio was charged with the death and sexual assault of his 22-month-old cousin, Delavina Mack. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, but since then, he's maintained his innocence.
Just over a decade ago, Tallio's case caught the attention of a group of law students at UBC who were focused on instances where there may have been a wrongful conviction. One of those students is now spearheading his appeal. The defense claims that back then Tallio was given bad legal advice and he didn't understand he was pleading guilty.
His team says they will introduce DNA evidence which they believe shows others could have committed the crime.
It's quite unusual to have a case come back before the courts after 4 decades.
This lawyer, who's not working on the case, says investigations are not always exhaustive.
New evidence does get discovered, new witnesses do come forward that weren't spoken to at the time. And whether or not that evidence will carry the day in this particular case will be up to the court.
Family members of Mack were in court today as the Crown argued that Tallio had the intellectual capacity to know what it meant to plead guilty back then. But his supporters say this appeal is a long time coming.
He's doing good. Says the truth is finally going to come out.
The hearing is expected to last a month, and it will be up to the court to decide whether his conviction was justice or the miscarriage of it. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Vancouver.
Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry is urging parents, players, and organizers of community sports to be mindful of public health guidelines. She says exposures are on the rise in sports like soccer and hockey, and that several facilities have closed as a result. That warning comes as BC records higher daily case tallies when compared to last week. 5 more people have died from COVID-19, and there were 549 new cases over the past 4 days. There have been 4 new outbreaks in care homes. 77 people are now in hospital, 24 patients in ICU. Total active cases now just sits under 1,500, but Dr. Bonnie Henry says the large case totals are partially the result of a testing backlog that recently cleared.
Numbers are higher than what we would like to see, and on average are higher than what we were seeing in the past week. But it is important to look at them in context. We are finding people who are positive with COVID-19. And while clearing the backlog meant an increase in the overall number of confirmed cases, the active cases and the percent that are positive remain stable.
Dr. Henry says the province is working on its testing strategy to make sure things are running as smoothly as possible.
Well, coming up after the break, tighter restrictions as other Canadian provinces grapple with high COVID case counts, and some advice from the country's top doctor on how to have a safe Halloween.
And thanks for staying with us during our commercial-free live stream tonight. Well, from baking bread to outdoor walks, many people have been exploring ways to lift their spirits during the pandemic.
For 4 photographers in Ontario, it was using their cameras, and they told CBC how they have found their purpose in the pandemic.
My name is Ian Virtue, and I am a photographer here in Windsor and founder of the Windsor Project. The Windsor Project first came to be at the beginning of COVID-19, about March and April. I just lost my job due to cuts thanks to COVID-19. I went from not really knowing what I wanted to do or what direction things were going to go into, finding purpose and finding a direction when we're at a time where we're not really sure how things are going to turn out.
Hello, I'm Jason O'Young, an amateur photographer from Huron County, Ontario. When the pandemic hit, I wasn't able to work anymore. So I was just sitting around thinking, what should I do? And photography is one of my favorite hobbies, so I decided to, spend more time on it. I went from having no purpose at all to kind of having goals, And especially during a pandemic, I'm sure the comet came around. And so that provided a good month of, solid entertainment planning and just something to look forward to.
Hey, my name is Babar Khan. I'm a photographer from the GTA. When the pandemic hit and finances became a big issue for everybody, I started going into, all right, I have an audience. I have a very marketable skill. I may as well try and make some use out of it. And I was able to do pretty well. I started selling prints. All 4 of those images were shot during the pandemic in about late March, early April. And it took dozens of hours to create those images, but it was the most satisfying thing.
Hi, my name is Nick Zook. Photography, the reason I got into it is especially living up here in the Northwestern Ontario region, it's just stunning. I lived in the city before and it has its own beauty, but I don't think it compares to what is here, and so I wanted to capture that through photography and share it with people who don't have the option of being able to come up here, especially the summer during the pandemic. It's very calming, it's very relaxing, and that's how I relax too, especially during the stressful time, is to be able to go out there, take a breath, look at what's around you.
Yeah, nice shots there. And they're using real cameras, not their phones.
They're making a comeback.
The cameras on the phones they're fine, but those are stunning.
There's something to be said about a real camera.
There is, for sure. Okay, we're back in just a second. Big updates from Ontario and Quebec with respect to COVID-19. So we'll have all that news and the rest of the news from across Canada coming up. COVID-19 infection rate remains high in Canada's 2 most populous provinces. Quebec reporting 815 new cases today. Ontario 746. And the rate is soaring in Manitoba as well, with 124 cases between Saturday and Monday. The province's chief public health officer says some people there are going out and socializing even while symptomatic.
We're right now following these numbers quite closely, and we have to look for that targeted approach. We know that a lot of the suspected transmission was occurring later night in some of the bar and licensed settings, and that's why we took this approach, and we're still fairly early on that. We know in the pandemic response system that we have posted online, there's a number of options in the orange restricted category for a number of sectors. And so we are, looking right now on what further restrictions could help with limiting the transmission.
The provincial government imposed tighter restrictions on Winnipeg last week, with bars and licensed restaurants ordered to close earlier than normal.
And Canada's top doctor is thanking people today who practiced safe health measures over the Thanksgiving weekend. Now Teresa Tam is turning her attention to Halloween.
So I think trick-or-treating outside with the right distancing, pre-packaging your treats so that people are not rummaging in a bowl of their bonbon candies is actually important. Having hand sanitizers for your kids, wearing a mask, and sometimes you can actually use different fabrics to turn it into part of your costume. But there's some really interesting ideas where people are handing out, treats at the end of a hockey stick or something, using a pool noodle to tell your kids how far they should be standing apart from each other. So there are ways to actually manage this.
Of course, science is racing to beat COVID-19, but it is hitting snags. Today, a trial for an experimental treatment was temporarily halted right on the heels of a vaccine trial that was paused. Christine Birak shows us it's a sign researchers are being careful, as they should be.
It's unsettling, but not unusual. A clinical trial testing an antibody treatment in hospitalized COVID-19 patients has been paused. The drug company, Eli Lilly, is offering few details. Reportedly, there's a potential safety concern. The treatment offers the body manufactured copies of human antibodies to help fight this coronavirus.
I'm going to send it to everybody.
The U.S. president received a similar experimental therapy. The antibody trial is now being delayed, just a day after Johnson & Johnson announced a volunteer in its COVID vaccine trial is sick. That drug maker has also paused its clinical trials, saying it needs to learn more about the unexplained illness and whether the patient was injected with the vaccine or not.
We still don't know whether it's the placebo arm or the vaccination arm. We're letting safety protocols follow proper procedure here.
I don't know the details of the reason why the trial was paused, but they'll be looking at that data in more detail.
About a month ago, another major vaccine trial was halted. AstraZeneca and Oxford University saw 2 participants fall ill after receiving another potential vaccine. Both had neurological problems. The trials have since resumed in most countries except the United States.
It doesn't mean that it's not good. It just means that it needs to be looked at.
Scientists say if a pattern of side effects or illnesses begins to emerge, there could be cause for concern. But no one has seen anything like that yet.
I'm sure people will resume the trial as soon as they are satisfied that patient safety isn't compromised.
And once they're sure it's safe, scientists still need to figure out if the treatment or vaccine actually protects people from the virus. Christine Birak, CBC News, Toronto.
Just before we go to break, nice to have you back, Anita.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're back for a couple of weeks while you're taking a time out from your mat leave. Thank you for helping us with the debate tonight and the upcoming election.
Happy to be here. Just a few weeks, though, then I return to my new baby girl.
All right.
And a reminder, you can also watch this newscast live on the free CBC Gem app.
CBC Vancouver also on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. You can also follow both of us and Johanna on Instagram and Twitter. Well, as mentioned, the first debate of the BC election gets underway in just a few minutes right here on CBC. Coming up, our political panel looks at what we can expect from the 3 main party leaders tonight.
Good evening, I'm Norman DePoe. This is News Magazine. Within the next 18 days, 3 of Canada's provinces will go to the polls. These elections come at a time when the whole field of federal-provincial relations is under close scrutiny, when more provinces are demanding more autonomy from the federal government, when provincial leaders are preparing for a November federal-provincial conference. The first of the elections will be in Canada's wealthiest province, Ontario, next Wednesday. British Columbia voters go to the polls the following Monday in what may well be the closest of all these fights. The last will be Nova Scotia. The Maritimers vote October 8th.
Here in British Columbia, those who follow things political are saying that BC is going to have minority government after the September 30th election. Premier Bennett and his social credit government have now been in power for 11 stormy years, and for the first time, his political enemies are convinced he can be beaten. The official opposition, the New Democratic Party, under leader Robert Strachan, is throwing everything into the fight. The New Democratic officials are saying it's now or never. BC has 4 strong political parties, and Premier Bennett is counting again on a fragmented opposition vote to give him a new mandate. Things were so close in the last election in 1960 that if little more than 1,000 BC voters in key ridings had switched parties, Premier Bennett would have been reduced to minority rule. As things turned out, he finally wound up with 31 seats. The New Democrats had 15 and the Liberals 5. The Liberals appear to have lost some of the enthusiasm they had in 1960, but they are still a potent political force in BC politics. And the Conservatives, under new leader E. Davy Fulton, the former federal Minister of Justice, are waging a campaign that makes it difficult to realize the party did not have 1 seat in the last legislature. However, the consensus is that Fulton needed more time to organize, and that once again it's between Social Credit and the New Democrats.
I had no commitment that I would be the MLA. I had no commitment that I would be Premier. I joined as an ordinary member like everybody else has to do in the social credit movement. If that was by design, I don't know what design is, but I had a purpose. Ever since I was 11 years old in New Brunswick, I had only one idea, and that was to make some money in business so I could enter public life.
I think every politician becomes a politician by accident, but once he is into politics, then if he's worth his salt, he applies himself to the job on hand and works on behalf of his party and the betterment of the province.
I had no set plans to become leader. Other people, however, pressed me very hard and put it to me as a matter of duty and responsibility in the light of the present circumstances in British Columbia. I then made a decision, yes, but as a result of the requests that were made to me, I made the decision, came out here and became leader of our party.
Every man becomes leader of a party, partly through accident and partly through design. In 1959, I let my name go forward in the leadership contest for the leadership of the Liberal Party in British Columbia. Others were hanging back. They looked on a doleful situation for liberalism in BC, why we had only 2 elected members in the provincial legislature.
Okay, a little change of scenery for meteorologist Joanna Wagstaff. Not so windy. Hey, you're matching with us perfectly.
Nicely done.
Yes. Yeah, I know. Anita, I wanted to welcome you back for a short stint in style and with a bang. So
love it.
Got some wild weather today. It is easy, though. Let me show you the big picture as we head into the overnight and tomorrow. Take a look at the forecast. The purple there is the snow. So easing conditions across the mountain passes tonight. Still winter driving condition for us on the south coast. Easing winds. And look at that as I take you into Thursday afternoon. Clearing skies as well, getting back into a nice mix of sun and cloud for your Wednesday. Temperatures will feel brisk in a new air mass, but we're actually getting colder as we head into the end of the week. Another Pacific system will move into the central coastal sections for Thursday, sinking down to us for Friday. So that's really the only day I see a big washout. Weekend, still a bit of a question mark. The models are not in agreement, so I'll keep you posted over the next couple of days. But for now, let's enjoy a bit of a breath with tomorrow's forecast.
We will enjoy it for sure. Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
And we are now just minutes away from the start of the BC Leaders Debate.
So a very quick check-in with our experts tonight. Tanya, let's start with you. What should voters be watching for as the debate kicks off?
Yeah, so I think for John Horgan, certainly we'll be looking at him to focus on his strengths, what his government has done over the past 3 years, and to really not rock the boat, right? They need to focus on their successes, build on his popularity, and not let the old angry John surface tonight. Andrew Wilkinson needs to be a turning point in this campaign. The BC Liberals have struggled struggle to gain momentum. They need a moment to see them really take off. And Sonia Furstenau's main goal will be to solidify her presence as head of the BC Greens. She's only weeks old as party leader, and she needs this face time to really raise her public profile.
And Jerry, very quickly, is the sexist comments controversy bound to come up tonight?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's part of the questionable decision by the Liberals not to speak more about it on the weekend, that they'll be faced with it now tonight. And, you know, it fits in with a pattern, I think, a little bit for the Liberals in terms of trying to dodge some of those kinds of questions. And so I think it'll very much be something that the other leaders will want to press and that Andrew Wilkinson's got to be ready to talk about.
All right, Jerry, thanks very much. Thank you, Tanya. Looking forward to hearing from both of you later on this evening.
That's the end of our show, and right now we have live coverage of the BC Leaders Debate. You can watch right here on CBC, or you can listen on our radio, and we'll have all the analysis post-debate coming up.
With us, the BC Leaders Debate begins right now.
Good evening. I'm Santa Ono, President and Vice Chancellor of the University of British Columbia. Welcome to the Chan Centre for the Performing Arts on our Vancouver campus. We're honored to be here on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. As a public university, UBC has long been a forum for debate and inquiry, which are fundamental to our democracy. Tonight, UBC is delighted to host this important discussion to help inform your decision for this provincial election. Enjoy the debate, stay safe, stay healthy, and on or before October 24th, please remember to vote.
An extraordinary time.
Scary, nerve-wracking.
Now we need a lot more compassion.
Health. I mean, the health of the public. It's hard for me to find a job right now.
How are we going to move forward?
A short season of promises.
Quality, accessible health care. To remove provincial sales tax completely for a year.
Plans.
Affordable housing. We're building it with a long-term view.
And pushback.
Mr. Wilkinson wants to stand and yell and scream and jump up and down. John Horgan called an unnecessary election.
We are ready to put an alternative in front of British Columbians.
Now, together face to face to help you decide. The 2020 BC Leaders Debate.
Good evening, BC. We're coming to you from the Chan Centre at the University of British Columbia for the only televised Leaders Debate of 2020. My name is Shachi Curl, and I will be your moderator for the next 90 minutes. With me, the leaders of our major political parties, Andrew Wilkinson of the BC Liberals, Sonia Furstenau of the Greens, and John Horgan of the NDP. Welcome. We thank UBC for its support in holding our debate here. Now, we are observing some strict COVID-19 protocols this evening. The leaders and I are physically distanced. There will be no handshakes at the end. And that's because this is anything but a traditional election campaign. There are estimates that almost half of the BC electorate could vote by mail. We hope our debate is a critical opportunity for you to assess the leaders and their party platforms. The leaders tonight have agreed to tonight's format and rules of order. Let me say, these are not suggestions, these are not guidelines, they are rules, and we will enforce them with a countdown clock visible to all leaders. Our debate format and main themes have been determined by the Broadcast Consortium, which represents BC's major broadcasters. Leaders will answer questions developed by the province's top political journalists and observers. These questions have not been shared in advance, though the leaders are aware of the general themes. You'll also see the leaders debate one-on-one in segments in which they've chosen to question each other on one of our themes. There will be plenty of opportunity for free two-way debate. Of the main themes, pandemic recovery will cover the economy, health, and long-term care. Cost of living will contain questions on housing, childcare, and transit. Environment, resource policy, and climate targets will be next, followed by social issues, racism and inclusion, homelessness, and the opioid crisis. Now, to the leaders, a personal appeal. I know your strategists and your supporters want you to win tonight. We want the real winners to be the voters of BC. And we know you can achieve this with a respectful debate that everyone can hear and understand. Please answer the questions you're asked. I don't want to interrupt you, but I will if I have to. And with that, it's time to debate. The leaders' speaking order was decided by a draw. The first question on pandemic recovery goes to Liberal leader Andrew Wilkinson. Mr. Wilkinson, you've called this election unnecessary, but if now is not the time for a vote because we're in a pandemic, why is it the time for a change in government? You have 1 minute.
Thank you, Sachi, and thank you to everybody who's watching tonight. British Columbia desperately needs a plan to lay out our economic future. We heard today from a major accounting firm that half of British Columbia households expect someone to lose their job this year. Another third can't pay their bills. So British Columbia needs a plan. And we believe that the livelihoods of British Columbians are at stake. We have to come up with that plan for the future, and the BC Liberal Party has a plan, a comprehensive plan, that it starts with getting rid of the provincial sales tax for a full year and then reducing to 3% the second year. Providing a bridging finance program for our tourism and hospitality industries, and also making sure that small businesses can survive, because this is going to be a tough winter. And we've got to hang together and make sure that British Columbians can see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's going to be tough, but we can do it together.
Thank you, Mr. Wilkinson. Your next question. You've promised to scrap the PST for a year and bring it back at 3% until, in your words, the economy recovers. That is projected to be a $10 billion bite out of provincial coffers. How are you going to make up the lost revenue?
We've been very clear saying that this economy is like a wartime economy. We have to invest in British Columbians. It's time to accept there are going to be deficits all around the Western world, and we've got to take the chance to borrow money at very low interest rates, which governments can do, to invest in our people, to make sure that they can survive economically for the next year or so. We need to make sure that COVID vaccine becomes available as soon as possible, and we expect there will be deficits, but we can get back to a balanced budget within about 5 years of the vaccine becoming available. This is the time to invest in ourselves, invest in our people, and make sure that British Columbians can look forward to prosperity in the future. It's not going to be easy, but when we work together, we can really make British Columbia a wonderful place. There are 5 million of us here, and we have enough skills, enough abilities, and the resources behind us to make sure that British Columbia prospers into the future. Once we get through COVID, we're going to have a lot of work to do, but we will succeed when we do it together.
First question to you, Mr. Horgan. Thank you, Mr. Wilkinson. Mr. Horgan, your governing partners, the Greens, had said that your government was stable, and yet you called this snap election. At a time when British Columbians need their political leaders to be focused on governing, you are campaigning. You also broke your agreement on fixed election dates. Why should voters trust you again? You have 1 minute.
Well, thank you, Sachi, for the question. I also want to acknowledge we're on the territory of the Musqueam peoples, and I'm delighted to be here at UBC this evening. I grappled with the decision to call an election. I looked at the challenges that we're facing as British Columbians. We're in a pandemic. We will be in a pandemic next spring and likely next fall and beyond. I looked at the challenges British Columbians were facing. Our worlds have been turned upside down. And I think the best course of action is to put the politics and the election behind us and focus on the needs of British Columbians. We have worked collaboratively, the Green Party and my caucus, to do a whole bunch of very extraordinary things in a short period of time. But it's been 3.5 years since British Columbians had their say. And I believe as we're going into the recovery phase and making sure that everyone's safe, we should ask British Columbians what they think and where they want to go. I believe it's the right time to do that so we can all be focused on British Columbians after October 26th or 24th.
Mr. Horgan, your next question. We have been, as you mentioned, in a pandemic for 7 months. But you did not share the details of your $1.5 billion economic recovery plan with British Columbians until days before calling this election. Why did you wait?
Well, we wanted to get it right. We put in place an economic recovery task force that involved labor, large businesses, small businesses, Indigenous groups, not-for-profits, and a whole host of others to ask them what they felt was the highest priority for the BC government. And then we asked British Columbians what they wanted to see from their leaders. Do they want us to invest in healthcare? Do they want us to make sure that we're bridging some businesses that were struggling, like tourism? And it took some time to get the views of the people that matter most in British Columbia, the people of BC. And then we passed every single piece of money through the legislature together, and then had Treasury Board confirm that this was an appropriate expenditure of BC resources. $6 billion between budgets is quite extraordinary. It's never happened before in living memory. I think we did it right. We got the right balance. And once the money was in place and started to go out the door to businesses, to communities, and to individuals, I felt it was time to ask BC where they wanted to go and who they wanted to lead them.
Thank you. Ms. Furstenau, your first question. BC's economic recovery is in part driven by large fossil fuel projects such as LNG and Trans Mountain, projects that many of your supporters oppose. In a governing coalition with either of the other parties, will you support these projects to protect the jobs that they provide?
Thank you, Sachi, and I also want to acknowledge we are in Musqueam territory tonight. I'm delighted to be here, and I will say this, we have to invest now into the future that we want. If we are propping up a dying fossil fuel industry with taxpayer money, what we're going to get are more emergencies down the road. We were choking on the fires, on the smoke from the fires from Western United States for weeks on end. There is no doubt that we are in a climate emergency right now. And the last thing that we need from governments is to be doubling down on investing and propping up and subsidizing to the tune of $6 billion this industry that puts our future, our lands, our children at peril. And I say that we can put that money, we can invest into a clean energy future that will create jobs and opportunities in every part of this province.
Your next question, Ms. Furstenau. Your party platform calls for an unprecedented transformation to a carbon-neutral economy in 25 years. Now, that is a massive change, and you're calling for the work to begin immediately. There are so many BC sectors, including small business and tourism, that are struggling to survive a pandemic right now. Is right now the right time for this work to begin? You have a minute.
Thank you. Right now is the time for us to be supporting those small businesses, to be getting the grant money out to the tourism operators who are wondering if they're going to make it through this winter. Right now, we should be doing that, not standing on this stage, not in an election campaign. But we also have to be aware that every choice we make right now determines our future. And for so many decades, governments have known in this province, across Canada, and around the world that we need to transform our economy. It's not a matter of making a choice. It's a matter of responsibility that we have to future generations, to our own children, who are looking to us, gathering in the streets, 100,000 youth in Vancouver gathering to listen to Greta Thunberg tell us the adults haven't lived up to their end of the deal. We need the adults to start living up to that end of the deal. Every investment needs to ensure that it addresses the needs right now and builds the future we owe to our children.
Thank you, Ms. Furstenau. It is now time for the same question to all of the leaders. As per the draw, we're starting again with you, Ms. Furstenau, then Mr. Wilkinson, then Mr. Horgan. More than 150 British Columbians have died of COVID-19 while living in long-term care. Their deaths revealed many vulnerabilities in the way this province looks after its aged, including the role of private for-profit facilities. My question to each of you, is there a place for private for-profit care in the care of our seniors? First, Ms. Furstenau, and you have 1 minute.
Right now, there are many private for-profit care homes in BC, although we've seen some pretty significant problems where the province had to take over the operation of some of those homes with retirement concept. What we are proposing is to recognize that any private for-profit care home that is getting government funding, that we know exactly how they're spending that money, that there is complete transparency and accountability, that is going towards care hours for seniors, because what we've seen is that they under-deliver in care hours. What we need to move to is a not-for-profit care home system, long-term care system in British Columbia, because seniors are not a commodity. Seniors are people that deserve our dignity and respect and care, and we want to ensure that not-for-profit, cooperative care homes are the future for this province.
Thank you. Mr. Wilkinson.
Well, thanks for the question, and my medical background is very helpful in this, and I've worked in long-term care facilities as a doctor. And the issue is, how do you keep the standards up? Who owns the concrete building is much less important than the care provided at the bedside. And that's why we have said it's time to invest $1 billion over 5 years into building private rooms for everybody who wants them in long-term care facilities. We've also said that the safest and most secure place for seniors is to have them in their own home as long as possible. So we're saying it's time to put forward a tax credit system that supports seniors living in the right place, usually their own home to start with, in the comfort and security of their home, which is the safest place to be during a pandemic, and have them able to get a credit for home care, for housekeeping services, for house repairs, so that seniors can live in dignity as long as they want to in their own home, and then move into a properly regulated care facility with the standards of care that I expect.
Mr. Horgan.
Thank you. I believe the balance in British Columbia needs to be right. Not-for-profit, run by those others that are run by the health authorities across BC, and there's a place for for-profit care. The issue is, where are we going to find the people? When we came to government, 9 in 10 care homes in British Columbia did not have the staff to meet the basic minimum standards that the former government had set for care in a day. 9 out of 10. And so that means that the 10,000 workers that were fired at the turn of the century were not able to help seniors when COVID hit. So we did 2 things. Firstly, we put in place a single site rule so that workers who were struggling to make ends meet by working in multiple locations would focus on just one. We stopped contract flipping, which is something Sonia and I talked about earlier in the year, about making sure that we were not having for-profit companies flipping contracts and driving down wages and forcing people to work in more facilities. The solution is more workers. We're going to hire 7,000 to care for our seniors.
Thank you. And now it is time for the leaders to take a turn debating pandemic recovery. Leaders, each of you are going to have a chance to ask a question of another leader of your choice for 15 seconds. That's going to be followed by an answer uninterrupted for 30 seconds before a 1.5 minutes of two-way free debate. And I'll remind you that the leader who is not involved in this segment does not speak. Once again, the order was chosen for questioning by a draw, and the first question to another leader goes to Mr. Wilkinson. To you, sir.
Thanks, Shachi. We heard last Thursday that 1/4 of the businesses in British Columbia expect to close forever within 12 months. There was an emergency relief package that all 3 parties voted in support of, but this election has blocked it. John, why would you block that package being sent out?
That package is out right now, Andrew, and you know that. The tax breaks that were part of our package, the relief on GST or PST rather, for business that are investing in machinery and equipment to retain workers is going out the door in the middle of September. The tax credit for those businesses also went out the door. The programs for small businesses have criteria. They're in place. The grant applications are in play. People are asking for those grant applications. They're filling them out. Public servants, not politicians, will make the decision, and those dollars will flow as quickly as possible.
And I think you know that every other province in Canada rolled out their emergency relief package in June or July. You dragged it out until 3 days before the election because you thought it would serve your interests. How can we trust you to look after our small businesses and our issues in British Columbia when you did this for purely self-serving reasons so that you could have an election to try to secure your employment for the next 4 years? What about the 150,000 people working in tourism who have no revenue this year? They looked for relief now, and what you did was effectively block it by saying you'd have a consultation process
We talked
that
to
would
British
go on for
Columbians,
the rest
Andrew.
of the year.
Mr. Wilkinson, let Mr. Horgan respond.
We talked to British Columbians, Andrew, which is what I think leaders are supposed to do. There's a litany of examples of where BC Liberals decided that they knew best, and we've been patching those holes since we were sworn in as government. The Greens and I worked together to patch many of those holes, but there's much more work to do. Of the $6 billion between budgets that we approved, $3.5 billion of it went out the door in March. The last bit was in consultation with British Columbians and businesses who wanted to know where to go. The tourism sector said, give us an advisory committee. We put it in place, and they'll decide where that money's spent.
Well, exactly. There was an advisory committee on the emergency relief package. They put out their reports in July, and you stalled and stalled, and now those tourism operators have nothing until next year because you chose to leave them out in the breeze.
We put in place.
That's not leadership, John.
We put
That's
in place
self-interest.
We put in
and your
place
self-interest.
Mr. Wilkinson, let Mr. Horgan
We
respond.
put in place opportunities for grants. You wanted to give them lines of credit. When you don't have any money, asking to borrow more is not the right answer. We're putting grants in place. It's the right way to go, and that's what tourism asked for.
All right, and that is time. Mr. Horgan, now you have a turn to ask a question. You've chosen to ask a question of Mr. Wilkinson.
I have.
Ms. Furstenau, you will not be involved in this segment of the debate. Mr. Horgan, to you, 15 seconds for your question.
Thank you. And it goes back to health care and long-term care. 9 out of 10 care homes not having a sufficient staff to do the job. The BC Liberals put a big hole in the budget in 2001 by giving tax breaks to the wealthiest, firing 10,000 people. Looking back on that now, was that the right choice to make?
You know, when I became involved in the BC Civil Service in 2001, the health budget was $8 billion. It's now $23 billion, and that growth happened under the BC Liberals. We built 14 hospitals, whereas in their 13 years in office out of the last 30, the NDP have built no hospitals at all.
Nonsense.
We're devoted to health care, and I, as a physician, am completely devoted to the idea of having high-quality health care for everyone in British Columbia, and I'll never be ashamed to say so.
You fired 10,000 people, largely women, to give a tax break to the wealthiest people in BC. Your former colleague, George Abbott, wrote a book about it. I commend it to your Christmas reading. It was the wrong thing to do. It focused on people who didn't need help and punished those who did. That doesn't
John,
build community. It doesn't build our economy. And it certainly didn't help seniors when the pandemic hit.
This is your recurring theme of creating this division amongst British Columbians of us and them. You put out a brochure for your candidates saying how to divide British Columbians. We're talking about bringing people together. We have to work together through this pandemic, and calling names and talking about things that happened 17 years ago will not help us get into the future. We've got to work together.
The consequences, Andrew, of your decisions were profound and tragic for seniors who found themselves in a pandemic without sufficient people to help them, and others who were going from place to place to place to make ends meet. That's a profound mistake. I think you should acknowledge that, take responsibility for it, and then we can start to build the togetherness that you're talking about.
I think we have to take responsibility for things like not building any hospitals, even though we've made promises. You've said the South Surrey Hospital would open multiple times. Nothing's ever happened.
You sold the land, man. We bought the land to build the hospital, and you sold it.
Nothing's ever happened.
Mr. Horgan.
The NDP have not built a single hospital in their 13 years in power of the last 30. We built 14, and we're proud of it because we invest in health care. We had to catch up with the NDP failure in the medical school. You shrank it from 160 to 120 places. We grew it to 288.
Gentlemen, that is time. It is now time for Ms. Furstenau to ask her question. Your question, I understand, is going to Mr. Horgan. It's yours.
Thank you, Shachi. And to Mr. Horgan, to John, I will say, you know, you've thrown us into this unnecessary election. You've put people into a place of unease at a time when we're facing this global pandemic. And you're campaigning in different ridings, indicating that infrastructure that you have promised could be at risk with the outcome of this election. I don't think it's a time to put more fear into people's hearts when we need to be assuring them that we're here for them.
Ms. Furstenau, that's your time.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sonia, for the question. And I did grapple with the decision to call the election, but I did so because I believe we need to put the politics behind us. What we're seeing this evening is opportunities for British Columbians to hear from myself, Sonia, and Andrew on what their vision is for British Columbia. How are they going to solve the challenges we face because of COVID-19? None of us anticipated this. We didn't think about it in 2017, 2018, or 2019. We didn't think about it in February when we tabled our balanced budget. We only thought about it in March when it hit us right in the face. We need leadership now, not for a few months, but for the next few years.
It's astonishing to hear you say that you needed to put politics behind us by putting us into politics front and center in a campaign election when we didn't need it. And what we had in the legislature, what British Columbians were counting on and so grateful for, was we actually put a scientist out in front. We put politics behind us. All three parties indicated and acted on ensuring that we were putting people first. We were putting the needs that people had to have met in a global pandemic first. That's what we should be doing right now. That's what we're not doing. We're here on the stage debating things when we should be in the legislature making sure people are getting what they need.
It's never a bad idea to ask British Columbians where they want to go and who they want to lead them.
It is a bad idea when you break an agreement and you break the legislation.
It was 3.5 years since the last election. That is an eternity with COVID-19. We need to make sure that British Columbians understand that we are going to stop this on the 24th of October and dedicate every ounce of our energy to making sure they're safe, making sure they're secure, and their families get through this. That's what we need to do. Us talking about how we get there is a good thing, not a bad thing. Asking British Columbians to choose is not a bad thing.
I think what British Columbians need to understand is that you're willing to break your word, you're willing to break agreements, and you're willing to break legislation that you yourself passed in the legislature in order to put the interests of your party, in order to seek that power and that majority that you so want for obedience in the legislature.
It's about British Columbians. They deserve to have that support.
That's time, Mr. Horgan. We're moving on, and thank you all. We are now moving on to the next set of questions about the cost of living, housing affordability, childcare, and transportation. First up to you, Mr. Horgan, the first question. Your government introduced a number of measures to make housing more affordable, but according to Statistics Canada, British Columbians and more than 1 in 7 BC households continue to live in a place that is considered unsuitable, inadequate, or unaffordable. What other tools do you have to help and support people struggling with housing affordability in this province? You have 1 minute, sir.
Thank you very much. Well, the challenges of housing have been enormous. In 2017, it was the #1 issue on everyone's minds, particularly those who live in the Lower Mainland, where they saw the average house price in Vancouver go up by $600,000 over 2 years, because the focus of the former government was on speculation and money laundering, not on people, not on roofs over their head, not on affordability. We brought in a host of measures, again, working with the Green Caucus to make life more affordable. We've seen the curve drop down on the cost of housing. It's still unacceptably high in metropolitan areas, but in the rest of British Columbia, we're building not-for-profit housing. We're focusing on co-ops again. We're making sure that renters get a bit of a break. We give homeowner grants to people who are fortunate enough to own a home. We should give renters a break as well. That's what we've been focusing on, bringing costs down for people in the whole continuum of housing they're looking for. It's not just houses in Shaughnessy, it's houses all over BC. And we need to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to have the dignity of a roof over their head.
All right, now let's focus, Mr. Horgan, again to you on one of your signature promises, and that's $10 a day daycare. Childcare advocates say so far the vast majority of eligible families are not able to access this benefit. Your own timeline called for $10 a day childcare province-wide by 2027. Can you still deliver on this?
I'm confident that we can. We wanted to bring forward $10 a day childcare. Our colleagues in the legislature would not support that. So we put in place pilots. We put in place a fee reduction so that British Columbians were not paying as much. And it's been transformative for families. Countless people talk to me about how they now have money in their pocket. Their children are in secure, stable, affordable, accessible childcare spaces, and we can and must do more. The pandemic showed us graphically the need to make sure that children are safe while parents are out working. Not just frontline workers during the pandemic, but right across the board. Access to childcare has been a problem. It was ignored by the previous government. We've made it our priority. We worked with our colleagues to make the best of a bad situation. We wanted to go with $10 a day all in. We didn't have that support. That's why we're putting it in front of British Columbians again this campaign, to let them know that we believe that $10 a day is achievable and it's something that we need to strive for, and we can get it done in the next 7 years.
Thank you. Ms. Furstenau, to you. The BC Greens are promising free care for children younger than 3 and free early childhood education for 3 and 4-year-olds. Now, you've not provided costing for this. How do you propose to pay for these programs? You have 1 minute.
Thank you, Shachi. And just to set the record clear on what John is saying here, of course we worked with them to bring child care and early childhood education. There is a long record of documents that shows that. And it's a little disingenuous to not put the truth about that working relationship. But in terms of our plan for early childhood education. What we have in that plan is to roll it into our public education system so that every parent of a 3- and 4-year-old knows that they have that 25 hours of early childhood education. We include that into the cost of our public education. We've put over $100 million towards this in terms of ensuring that we can have those spaces built into our public schools, recognizing there is nothing more important in a child's educational career than that start of early childhood education at 3 and 4 years old. We want to have the most successful province that we possibly can. It starts with early childhood education.
Thank you. Your next question. Another key promise of yours is to implement a 4-day work week. In a minority government, would you insist that a governing partner move forward with this promise? Is it a deal breaker?
To be clear, the promise isn't to implement a 4-day work week. It is to work with stakeholders, with labor, with businesses, to incentivize and find ways to support businesses to create a more healthy work-life balance for them and their employees. We've seen examples of this in other countries. In Japan, where Microsoft Japan went to a 4-day work week and saw an increase in productivity and an increase in worker health and happiness. We have to look at the world we're in right now and say, how can we have the healthiest, most thriving population possible? And we've had all of these increases in productivity and working from home, and yet we still adhere to this 100-year-old idea of working 5 days a week. If we can have more productivity, more revenue, better health outcomes, better mental health, better work-life balance, let's look at the ways to do that and work together with stakeholders, business, and labor to bring those programs forward.
Thank you, Ms. Furstenau. Mr. Wilkinson, to you now. You've promised to privatize ICBC, but a look at the rates in Alberta show that private car insurance for some drivers is skyrocketing. So how are you going to ensure that your plans to privatize auto insurance will bring down rates for everyone, including young drivers? And you have a minute, sir.
What we're talking about is competition. Privatization is a confusing term. What we're talking about is keep the ICBC no-fault model and allow other insurers to offer their products in competition. They do it in Saskatchewan. It works in different places across Canada in different forms. And what's the concern? Why would you not allow competition and see if they can come up with a better price? The same thing's true not just for the bodily injury from car accidents, but also from the vehicle damage. Let's have competition and see what the choices are and let people make up their own minds. People are really tired of being pushed around by the ICBC monopoly, being told that they have no choice. We've seen this with young people who've seen their rates go through the roof from $1,500 to $7,000 under the NDP. That's not acceptable. So we've said give those younger drivers 2 or 4 years credit on their driving record, depending on whether or not they've taken driver education. We can do better. We don't just have to live with this old dinosaur of ICBC. Nobody else in the world uses it, and why do we?
Thank you. And your next question, sir. During your party's last term, the average cost of a new home in Metro Vancouver increased 50%. According to Dr. Peter German's report, the role of dirty money laundered through provincially regulated casinos was a part of the problem. If elected, will you commit to continuing the money laundering inquiry?
Of course. I practiced law for 25 years. Mr. Justice Cullen is a highly respected member of the judiciary. He needs to get on with his work, and he suspended his work to stay out of the politics of this election. So the Cullen inquiry needs to proceed, and the issue that you first started with was housing prices. Under the NDP, this last year alone, condo prices are up another 10% in Vancouver. Condo insurance is up anywhere from 40 to 400% under the NDP. It's not working. Their housing program is not exactly a housing program. It's an increased cost housing program. After all of the talk, after all of the promises, after all of the overblown promises of the NDP, housing is still a major problem, and we have said there's a better way to deal with this. We've got to anticipate the supply of housing for the 60,000 people coming to British Columbia every year, year after year. We need to do better by providing housing for everybody in British Columbia. That will bring the price down rather than the tight market the NDP have left.
Thank you. And now again, it is time for some leader-to-leader debate, this time on the cost of living. Same rules apply, a 15-second question, a 30-second uninterrupted answer, and a minute and a half of free debate. And the first question this round for another leader goes to you, Ms. Furstenau.
Thank you, Shachi, and my question is for Andrew. You're proposing a massive tax cut to the PST, and you'll say that this is to help cost of living, but it has no actual outcomes. When you take the revenue out of what we need right now to be able to provide services to the people of BC,
Come to the question, Ms. Furstenau.
How can you justify that?
Our view is that British Columbia is in a tight spot now. This is like a wartime economy when we hear that a quarter of businesses may close within a year and half of our families expect someone to be unemployed in the next year. So we've said it's time to turbocharge the BC economy. If we drop the PST to zero for a year, businesses will reinvest. Things will go on sale. People will buy equipment and they will go out shopping and they will enjoy their lives right here in British Columbia because it has to be spent in British Columbia to get the tax break.
That's time, and now free debate between the two of you.
Andrew, the challenge with this is that you can't really identify outcomes that would come from that PST cut. What we need, and what economists are telling us right now, is that we need to invest in services, we need to invest in infrastructure, we need to build the economy that we want. Taking that $6 or $7 billion hole in revenue can really undermine government's ability. In addition to your platform, which seems to have a pretty massive deficit attached to it, why would you want to put more deficit into the government's coffers right now when we need to be investing every penny into the future that we want to build?
And your point is right. We need to be investing every penny we've got. Governments can borrow money very cheaply these days. That's why we need to build infrastructure to create employment, to get people going and building British Columbia. And we're talking about an investment that the BC Business Council said was one of their highest priorities. When they advised John Horgan in the summertime, he ignored their advice. They said cut the PST in half for 2 years. We said let's cut it fully for a year because this pandemic is not going away quickly. We've got to boost the economy, and that's a very good way to do it, according to the economists.
We've seen the results that happened in the early 2000s when there's a 25% tax cut across the board. We saw cuts in services. We see the results of that right now, 20 years down the road when people are suffering from mental health issues, from housing and homelessness. This is what is the outcome of those kinds of tax cuts.
And I have said there will be no cuts to government services under a BC Liberal government. We've got to keep the budget going because those people sleeping in the park near my house
Thank you,
need a
Mr.
home.
Wilkinson. Thank you. That is time. But now back to you with a question to Mr. Horgan. You have 15 seconds for your question.
Well, coming back to housing, we've learned that condominium prices have gone up by 10% in the last year in Vancouver. House prices are up 5%. Condo insurance up as much as 400%. You promised British Columbians affordable housing.
To eliminate the speculation tax so the speculators that used to support the BC Liberals can get back to the good old days, the Wild West of driving up costs. The speculation tax has meant that 11,000 condominiums that were vacant are now being populated by renters. That's bringing down costs for regular people, and you know full well that if you give back to the 1% that are affected by the spec tax, the $115 million, we'll have no money to build the housing that we need. It works for everybody. It's very popular except with BC Liberals.
Well, I think you know the rents in Metro Vancouver are up $2,000 per year since your government took office.
That's not true.
Your housing plan is a complete fiasco because the cost of housing is the highest it's ever been, while incomes are actually going down. Rental situations are still difficult because the vacancy rate is still the same as it was when you took office. We've got a big problem here, Mr. Horgan, because your housing policy has produced no results whatsoever.
Again,
and
Andrew,
we say it's time to increase the supply of housing.
You got to get out of your neighborhood.
You got to
get out of your neighborhood and talk to people, my friend. It's working for lots and lots of people. AJ, who was living in a tent in Maple Ridge, is now living in a house. He's no longer using drugs. He has a job, and he gets to watch football on a Sunday afternoon. We take that stuff for granted, but when you don't have a house and one is provided for you, it changes your your life. That's what our policies are doing. You want to go back to let the speculators drive up, we'll make a lot of one-bedroom condominiums in downtown Vancouver and leave everybody else to fend for themselves. Housing belongs to everyone in every corner of BC, and that's what we're focused on.
If we want to talk about your record on homelessness, we'll get into that shortly, and it's pretty appalling, Mr. Horgan. What we're talking about here is people who are trying to look for a place to live for the long term. Renters can't find anything. The rents have gone up under your watch, and similarly, the cost of housing, someone interested in buying.
It's almost like you didn't think the world existed before 2017.
I know the truth hurts, John,
17 years.
You have to admit the truth.
And that's time. That's it. Now to Mr. Horgan with a question for Ms. Furstenau.
Thank you. Sonia, you sided with the BC Liberals and did not support us doing away with tolls in the Lower Mainland. You tried to block, in fact, you did block a hydro bill this summer that would have brought down hydro rates for people, and you do not support our COVID benefit of $1,000. If we're not going to help people with affordability in a pandemic, when would we?
Well, it's interesting, the COVID benefit of $1,000. I think that, John, you brought that out as a campaign promise, not something that was ever in the legislature. The tolls on the bridges, the BC Hydro decisions, these are like short-term decisions. We need to be making long-term decisions in this province that get us to a place of resiliency, that recognize that we have to have ways of getting people around, mobility that doesn't rely on single passenger vehicles. We saw an uptick in traffic after those tolls were taken off, and you used it as an excuse to go ahead with Site C because of the deficit that it created in the budget.
We eliminated the tolls, and that took pressure off the other congestion points in the Lower Mainland and allowed people to use modern infrastructure that they shouldn't have to pay for, just like other infrastructure in British Columbia. It's built for all of us. It should be out of our tax base. That's our position. That's our value. With respect to short-term solutions for people who are struggling, of course that's what we need to do, especially in a pandemic. And driving down hydro rates is a way to do that. Under the BC Liberals, it was an instant teller machine. They just kept pulling money out.
Let's talk about the impact that Site C is going to have on hydro rates in the future. And let's recognize that you're also talking about undermining the resiliency and the local energy production of First Nations. They had invested their money in the past. This was a bill that was going to wipe out their economic
every single
interest
project that was
and
approved
leave
went
them
ahead. Every single project
Ms.
Furstenau, to Mr. Horgan. Continue.
Billions of dollars in surplus energy because of the choices of the BC Liberals with private power production is why we're in the mess we're in. Every Indigenous program that was on the books is going ahead. We put a stop to just giving money to developers so that we could focus on core competency at hydro and bringing costs down for people. That's what we need to do.
John, I'm not sure who you were talking to, but that was certainly not what we were hearing from First Nations and Indigenous communities around the province or from Union of BC Indian Chiefs or First Nations Leadership Council. This was your first chance to do a bill with the lens of UNDRIP, and you didn't do it.
Every project was by Indigenous people was approved and going forward.
We are moving on. We're out of time, I'm afraid, and we're going to now move on in this vein to the environment, resource policy, and climate targets. We're going to start with a question to each of you, on which each of you will answer consecutively according to draw, beginning with the Greens, then the Liberals, then the NDP. You will each have 1 minute. So beginning with you, Ms. Furstenau, do you believe that reconciliation with First Nations requires a province to fully consider Indigenous opposition to resource developments in their territories, even if it means the project will never be built? You have 1 minute.
Thank you. And when we passed the Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, it was to start a new relationship, a new chapter of reconciliation in this province. That chapter is going to be very long. We have to keep working towards more and more reconciliation, recognizing that decisions have been made about First Nations peoples and their territories for hundreds of years in this country, not taking into account the impacts it has on them or on their well-being. We have unbelievable and unacceptable rates of poverty amongst First Nations and Indigenous peoples, and we have to work in a government-to-government relationship to ensure that we are investing in a future that is sustainable and healthy for all of them, as well as a future that is sustainable and healthy for every British Columbian. It can't just be words, it has to be action. It can't be the same old of say one thing and do another.
Thank you, and to you, Mr. Wilkinson.
Well, I think we've got a bright future in British Columbia if we engage all of the people in all the decisions. It's very important to be able to move ahead with natural resource projects, and those get reconciled by negotiation. And in so many circumstances, we have First Nations who are very, very keen on resource development in their communities as a chance to get ahead. We have to have the right resource benefits agreements, we have to have the right resource income sharing agreements in place, and we have to work with First Nations whenever possible. Sometimes conflicts arise because of linear projects that go through many different territories. The right place to resolve those is in the courts. It's the orderly, peaceful way to do things, because blockades simply don't work. It just gets in everyone's way and causes tension and unhappiness. We have to look at a British Columbia where everybody's invested in our future so they all can benefit, whether it's from solar power, whether it's from wind power, whether it's from liquid natural gas. Indigenous-led projects are going to be part of the future for British Columbia, and John Horgan did his best to cancel them.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wilkinson. And now to you, Mr. Horgan. 1 minute to answer. Would you like a repeat of the question? Or
No,
you
I got it. I'm
okay.
good. Thanks, Sachi. I am very proud to have been the Premier that introduced the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People in our legislature. I'm equally proud that my two colleagues on the stage tonight unanimously supported it. We did that, as Sonia said, to try and erase a stain of 150 years of colonialism on land that the Supreme Court of Canada has said is rights and title existing for nations right across this province. The Musqueam territory we're on today is unceded. The challenges of keeping our economy going when we're just starting to reconcile after 150 years of occupation is daunting. But I agree with Andrew, this will shock everybody, but I agree with him that we need to make sure that everyone dials into the projects that need to go forward. It is not all one size for everybody. The tall tan in the Northwest can't wait for economic activity. Other communities are more reluctant to do that. Cooperation, collaboration, and dialogue with everyone will bring prosperity to Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples alike. I'm proud of what the three of us did on that occasion, and I think we can do more together.
Thank you, Mr. Horgan. And coming back to you now on an individual question. Your government has called ICBC a dumpster fire for the BC Liberals. Is the Site C Dam project your dumpster fire? The project is billions of dollars over budget. BC Hydro has reported serious structural issues with construction and has offered no clear fix. Will you go ahead with this project? You have a minute, sir.
Well, thank you. It wasn't my project. I didn't start it. The BC Liberals did. The former Premier, her only motivation was not to build clean energy for British Columbia, not to attach it to a climate action plan, but get it past the point of no return. It was the most difficult decision we had to make as a government in the first few weeks of our time in office. We brought in experts on both sides of the issue. We grappled with it and made the determination that $4 billion was already spent, and we felt that taxpayers shouldn't absorb that when we could have clean, green energy into the future. So we proceeded with the project. New challenges have come forward. We've appointed an individual who used to work for Mr. Wilkinson's government to look at the economics, to look at the engineering, and report back to government. When we see that report, we'll make a decision. I'm not going to foreclose anything at this point in time. Site C was not our project. We inherited it. We're doing the best we can for the ratepayers and the people of British Columbia. It's a daunting challenge, but I believe we're up for it.
Next question to you, sir, and let's talk about something that has happened on your watch, and that's your government allowing the continued export of raw logs, the ongoing construction of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, LNG, and again, Site C. Why would a voter who puts climate issues first ever support the NDP?
Well, certainly the Kinder Morgan project is not a project that we supported. We went all the way to the Supreme Court to try and block it. We did everything in our power, used all the tools in our toolbox. The federal government intervened, bought the project, and is proceeding with it. The former government tied the hands of our government, and our colleagues in the Green Caucus were of one mind on how we went forward on Kinder Morgan, or now Trans Mountain. LNG is something I've always supported, provided it sits within our economic framework as well as our climate action plan. I believe LNG Canada in Kitimat is going to create thousands and thousands of jobs, the largest private sector investment in BC history. Indigenous people are fully dialed in to make some benefits for their communities and create some wealth that will be spread throughout the North and throughout British Columbia. I believe it's a good project. It fits within our plan, and I'm very proud of it.
All right. To you, Ms. Furstenau. You've promised a carbon-neutral province by 2045. You've said you'll end oil and gas subsidies and put the money into retraining workers for employment in a green economy. But frankly, there are a lot of people who are worried about being left behind. What do you say to them? You have 1 minute.
We can't leave people behind in the transition of our economy, but we can't leave young people behind by not transitioning the economy. We have to do this. So many governments have not done it in the past. We're now in the emergency that we're in. And propping up an industry with taxpayer money, as these two have decided to do with the fracking and LNG of LNG Canada, $6 billion to keep it afloat because it can't make it on its own makes no sense. But if we were building a clean economy with renewable energy, instead of going ahead with Site C, which is to provide subsidized electricity to fracking, we could have invested that money into green, clean energy projects in every region of this province and have those family-sustaining jobs in every part of BC. Instead, all the poker chips on LNG and fracking and the largest point source emission project in Canada.
Thank you. Your next question. Your caucus opposed the NDP moving forward on big fossil fuel projects, but you continued to support the Horgan government. You were a part of that caucus, Ms. Furstenau. Did the Greens abandon their principles in pursuit of power?
You know, people talk about balance of power. We always talked about balance of responsibility, and the responsibility that we had not just to bring things around on one issue. We have to serve everybody in British Columbia, and right now people need us to be focusing on their needs. This is the hardest winter that people and businesses, tourism operators are going to face, and we should be serving them. That is the approach that we took these last 3.5 years. Yes, we should not be moving forward with these projects. We voted against the LNG tax bill 14 times. It was Andrew and the BC Liberals that collaborated with the NDP to pass that bill, not us. We voted against it. And we also supported all of the measures focusing on housing, focusing on social services, focusing on ensuring in this last year that people are getting the support and the help they need from government. That's what we need to do.
Thank you. To you, Mr. Wilkinson, your first question. The BC Liberals under Gordon Campbell made history by implementing a carbon tax. The BC Liberals under Christy Clark froze long-planned increases to that tax. If elected, what will your BC Liberals do with a currently scheduled 10% increase to this tax? You have 1 minute.
The carbon tax was brought in as an innovative measure to address climate change. And we have ended up with the most fuel-efficient vehicle fleet in Canada as a result. It's been plateaued at certain periods when the federal government got involved because we couldn't be out of step with the federal government. But in terms of climate change, British Columbia's got a real opportunity. In spite of John Horgan wanting to import dirty American power and shut down Aboriginal-operated power projects in British Columbia this summer, which was voted against by the other two parties and never went anywhere, we've said we can make British Columbia a clean energy powerhouse once again. We can do wind and solar. We know that oil is going to be phased out in the next 30 years or so, so let's make British Columbia the powerhouse it should be, and that's possible because we are so good at what we do in electrical power. We also need electric charging stations for vehicles around the province so that we can make transportation cleaner and greener. This is our plan to make British Columbia the clean energy powerhouse it should be.
That's time, Mr. Wilkinson. It wasn't a clear answer to the question. Would you like 10 seconds to answer it again?
The carbon tax has to be in synchronization with the federal carbon program. We all know that, and it will move ahead incrementally in concert with the federal government.
All right. You have said, if elected, that you would stop Trans Mountain protesters who are protesting the pipeline. But Section 2 of the Canadian Charter of Rights guarantees freedom of expression and association. So how, then, do you propose to stop these protests?
Well, the courts in Canada are very accustomed to dealing with these kinds of things. We see it regularly across Canada. And what we have to do is say that these disputes have to be resolved in the courts, not by blocking railroad tracks, not by blocking the West Coast Express and leaving 5,000 people stranded so they can't get home for dinner and pick up their kids from daycare. We need an orderly way of dealing with these things. Protest is completely legitimate, but the courts have made it very clear that protest has to be within reasonable limits, and their tolerance can be tested at times where they will actually impose criminal contempt charges upon these individuals. It's fair enough to protest. It's a very valid thing, and here on this university campus it happens all the time. but it's got to be respectful. It cannot be destructive, it cannot be disrespectful, and it needs to be resolved in the courts, not on the railway tracks of British Columbia.
Thank you. And now it is time for leader-to-leader debate, this time on the environment. So to remind everyone, it's a 15-second question, 30 seconds of uninterrupted answers, followed by a minute and a half of free debate. Now, the first direct question to another leader in this round goes to Mr. Horgan. I understand you have a question for Mr. Wilkinson.
I do. Andrew Weaver and the Green Caucus and I worked on the most progressive climate action plan in North America. Clean BC is leading the way everywhere on this continent. You stopped caring about climate change about 2011. What can you say to British Columbians about whether you would pick up where Sonia and I left off?
Well, let's be clear. Clean BC is a bit of a sham. Greenhouse gases have gone up regularly each year under the NDP. Nothing has been accomplished. And at the same time, the Clean BC plan doesn't even have funding allocated to it for 25% of the targets. So your Clean BC plan is a giant hot air balloon with not much in it, Mr. Horgan. We have to have a real plan that will actually work with the federal government to make sure we're addressing climate change. And that's why I say British Columbia should be a clean energy powerhouse so we can electrify our transportation.
Clean BC is a continent-leading plan that the Greens and the NDP worked on together. It is trend-setting for the rest of Canada. Mr. Wilkinson's plan about being an energy powerhouse involves making sure that developer friends got power purchase agreements to drive up costs for hydro users. That's not a plan to create a clean economy. That's a plan to create money for speculators and your wealthy friends. We need a plan that works for everybody. Do we need charging stations around BC? Yes, we do. We have more than any other jurisdiction in North America, and we need to keep building on that.
John, you need to tell the truth. We're in a pandemic. People are in crisis. It's like when you have a very ill patient in the hospital, you tell them the truth. And when you say that Clean BC is continent leading, it's a sham.
Nonsense.
We all know it's a sham.
Nonsense.
Greenhouse gas emissions have gone up every year on your watch, and the plan isn't even properly funded. So we need to do something real in British Columbia, not do the blame game that John Horgan constantly plays, looking for a snake under every rock. There's always someone to blame. We need to actually work for British Columbians and get things done because we're in a pandemic and we require an economy that will build us into the future.
The Green Caucus and the NDP brought forward the plan. It is funded. We're continuing to work on it. We're funding more spaces in our universities for science, math, engineering, and technology so that we can have our younger people unlock the challenges of the future. And that's how you build a plan that works. You drove up tuition fees. You did away with grants for kids going to school. You're not building a BC. You're shutting it down for your friends to make more money.
Ms. Furstenau, you now have a question to Mr. Horgan.
Thank you, Chachi. And the question is around old growth. We have precious little old growth left in British Columbia, and under your government, the logging of old growth continued at the same rate as it did under the previous government. How do you answer the people who recognize the importance of protecting old growth at a time like this?
Thank you, Sonia, for the question. And I recall that you were very supportive of the report that came to us that we commissioned to look at how we could manage old growth going forward. It will result in the deferment of 353,000 hectares of old growth forest into the future. I think that's a positive plan. We need to consult with Indigenous peoples because at the end of the day, the land that our forests are on ultimately belongs to them. That collaboration can't happen overnight. I think the plan is in place. A few weeks ago, you thought it was a good one. I don't know why you don't think it's so good today.
Well, that plan, I would say, is in place because we pushed for action on old growth. We were the only voices in the BC legislature raising it. And I will point to the kind of new math that gets used all the time in talking about what is protected. It often includes scrubby, subalpine trees, not the deep river valley bottoms of old growth that we all consider to be that iconic, and the responsibility that we have as a province to protect some of the last old growth in the world. This is so important. Your government has shown that they're not interested in protecting old growth, and it's going to go.
I just disagree with you, Sonia. We put in place experts to come back and tell us where we should go, and we're implementing that plan. That's what responsible governments do. I live on Vancouver Island just like you. My constituency includes some of the most spectacular old growth in the province, as does yours. I understand the value of that to British Columbians long term, and that's why we've got a plan in place that involves Indigenous peoples, industry, workers, and people who are passionate about the environment. That's how you make progress. We've been doing that for 3.5 years. I believe we can continue to do that into the future.
I believe we could be doing that right now, actually. We didn't need to be in this election. But I also believe that I've seen reports about 4 out of 5 regions in British Columbia are not only logging old growth unsustainably, but logging all forests unsustainably, exceeding what the government levels of sustainability are, and cutting down way more trees than we can afford in this province. We need sustainable forestry in this province.
I'm sorry, that is time, and it is time now for Mr. Wilkinson's question to Ms. Furstenau.
Thank you. And Sonia, your party made John Horgan Premier. He broke his deal with you 3 weeks ago. He broke his own law on fixed election dates. He called this election for purely selfish reasons. Can John Horgan be trusted on the environment or anything for that matter?
Thank you, Andrew, for the question. And I think that what we need right now, more than ever, we're in a global pandemic, is we need people to be able to recognize that when people are elected, when we are elected to office, that we put aside partisanship and we put our duty to service above all. And this is what we've been doing in the legislature. We haven't agreed on everything, but we have put that service in front of everything else. We need to get back to that.
And I'm glad you bring up the concept of duty, because it's something that was hardwired into me as a practicing doctor. You've got a duty to the patient, just like Dr. Henry has a duty to every one of us in British Columbia to protect our health, and we fully support her work. And so this issue of duty comes up, and we look to Mr. Horgan and say, where did your duties lie when you called this election 3 weeks ago for no reason other than to protect your own job security? Nobody wants this election except you. And yes, I've been working with Ms. Furstenau through the summertime to make sure the funding was in place to deal with the pandemic. We all worked in a very collegial way. I said back in March, we need to fight the virus, not each other. And Ms. Furstenau and I proceeded on that basis. So where do you think we can go in British Columbia with a premier like this who breaks all the rules after people have agreed to act in a trusting manner to serve the people of British Columbia?
More than any other time, I think in any of our lifetimes, we have overlapping emergencies. What I would like to see is for all of us to agree that we have to treat these emergencies the way we treated COVID-19, where we said this is above partisanship. We have to put the health and well-being of people first. We should be doing that with the opioid and overdose crisis. We should be doing that with the housing and homelessness crisis. We should be doing that to ensure that we have sustainable transportation that's accessible and affordable for everybody in this province. We should be making sure that teachers feel safe in their classrooms. We should all be rising above partisanship in a time like this.
And that is time for that segment. It is now time to move on to issues surrounding social issues, including racism and inclusion, homelessness, and the opioid crisis. And we're going to start this segment with a personal question to each of you about racism. You're going to answer this question consecutively, first beginning with Mr. Wilkinson, then Mr. Horgan, then Ms. Furstenau. And the question is this. This has been a time of tough conversations about the inclusion and treatment of those who are Black and Indigenous and people of color. How have you personally reckoned with your own privilege and unconscious bias as a white political leader? We're going to give you a little bit of extra time on this question. You have 1 minute and 15. Each of you do.
This is a very important question for all of us to look into ourselves to answer. I came from Alberta as a young doctor, started work at St. Paul's Hospital, and met people from parts of the world I'd never come across before. I had to get used to the idea that it wasn't all like Southern Alberta, that there's a more complex world out there. I then worked in Indigenous communities, Dease Lake, Lillooet, Campbell River, dealing with a lot of Indigenous people as patients. Got to know them, got to know their way of life, and I believe there's a young, maybe not so young man in Lillooet now who was named after me when I delivered that baby from his mother. And so that's the kind of experience that humanizes it for you and makes you realize we are all equal. We all have to feel like we belong here, that we're citizens, and we'll be respected in British Columbia. And to my mind, that's one of the highest duties of government, is to make sure that every single person in this province feels that they are equally engaged and involved. And when I hear John Horgan talking about us and them, good and bad, friends and enemies, it's actually kind of sad to see a leadership figure like Mr. Horgan degrade himself by going to dividing communities rather than uniting them. I believe that everybody in British Columbia needs to be treated equally, respectfully, and that's our duty in government.
Mr. Horgan, to you.
Well, thank you. Sachi, and I grew up in southern Vancouver Island. I was a lacrosse player. I played with Indigenous friends. I played with South Asian friends. For me, I did not see color. I felt that everyone around me was the same. And I brought that through my entire adult life, and I've instilled that in my children. And this generation and the generation after continues to see everyone equally. Gays, lesbians, people of color, regardless of who you are, people need to be included. I think it's a bit rich for Mr. Wilkinson to be talking about inclusion to me and casting aspersions on my character. What I've tried to focus on since I had the opportunity to represent people in my community is to bring people together, to unite people, to recognize that we are all in this, regardless of our background, regardless of our orientation. We all need each other to help out. I believe that what we need to do is tell the stories of our diversity. That's why we've established a Chinese-Canadian museum, so that the 150 years of participation in our culture
Sir,
and our
with
society...
the 15 seconds left, this is a question about your own personal reflection.
And I'm saying to you that we need to tell the stories about who we are as British Columbians. That's what I grew up learning, and that's what I want to do as the leader of the government. I think that's critically important, that you lead by example based on what you believe. I haven't seen that from Mr. Wilkinson in the past week.
And that is time, Mr. Horgan. And we go to you, Ms. Furstenau. I'll repeat the question. How have you personally reckoned with your own privilege and an unconscious bias as a white political leader?
I think the moment for me that really hit it home was imagining being a mother and saying to my child, if you're approached by a policeman, don't do anything, just put your hands up. I can't imagine being a mother and imagining that my child, my son, might die because of the color of his skin. We aren't all equal. I wish we were, but we're not. In this province, in this country, and around the world, people who are black, people who are of color, are still experiencing systemic and personal racism on a daily basis. The three of us cannot reckon what that's like because we are white. But we have to, in our roles, work to end that systemic racism and work to ensure that all mothers can let their children go out and not be worried that they're going to be killed.
Thank you, Ms. Furstenau. Now back to you. Per the draw on a specific question for each leader on social issues, your first question. The Greens have had trouble attracting candidates and voters who represent the diversity of BC. Why do you think this is? You have 1 minute.
It's something we absolutely need to look at and work on, and it connects right to the question that you just asked. We're going to make better decisions as a province. We're going to make better decisions as legislators and decision makers when the people making the decisions bring all perspectives to the table. We have increased our diversity in this election campaign, despite it being a snap campaign, but we have a long way to go. And I'm committed to that. We need more people of color. We need more diversity. And we need to have that because it's how we're going to make better decisions. It is about perspective. When you haven't experienced how it is to be young or female or black or Indigenous, and you're trying to make decisions that impact those communities, you cannot understand it fully. So we need those people, we need that diversity so that we're making decisions that reflect what needs to happen in this province.
Thank you. Your follow-up question. You have one of the highest rates of First Nations youth in your Vancouver Island riding, youth who are in care. Your MLA office has advocated for many young Indigenous mothers facing removal, apprehension of their babies by the provincial government. Why have you become so personally involved in these cases?
We are still removing Indigenous children from their families at the same rate as during the residential school era. And the mothers and the parents that we see in our office are devoted and loving. Most of the removals that happen in this province, over 70%, are because of a subjective idea of neglect, which really means poverty. We're removing children because of poverty from their parents, the trauma of that on a child, on an infant's brain, on the mother, on the community, is what we are replicating generation over generation. It's why we have so many of the problems we have right now. I cannot understand why either of the two parties feel the urgency, do not feel the urgency that I feel on addressing this issue. We need to stop this in Canada and in BC.
Thank you, Ms. Furstenau. Now to you, Mr. Wilkinson, your first question on this theme. Longtime Liberal MLA Jane Thornthwaite apologized on the weekend for sexualized comments that she made about NDP MLA Bowen Ma. Ms. Ma is the youngest MLA in the BC legislature. You were present when the comments were made. You did not object. You did not interject. The leader sets the tone for the team. Are you setting the right tone? You have 1 minute.
That very unfortunate event was the subject of a lot of controversy this weekend, and I apologized on Sunday morning to Bowen Ma, the MLA involved, and Jane Thornthwaite has also apologized. I went out this morning in front of the media and also said that what happened was completely unacceptable, an exceptionally poor taste, and it was sexism with one female MLA commenting on another female MLA. We have to move into a new world where those kinds of things aren't acceptable. I didn't speak up at the time because it was a roast for an 87-year-old MLA who was retiring. But I think everyone on the call realized that it was totally inappropriate and it was really unacceptable. In retrospect, it would have been better if I went out on the call or immediately after the call and corrected the behavior of Jane Thornthwaite. But we thought it's time to move forward. I've offered to speak directly with Bowen Ma, the MLA involved, and express my apologies to her directly for not intervening and stopping the comments of Ms. Thornthwaite.
Thank you. Your next question, Mr. Wilkinson. Last year, you called life for renters in British Columbia wacky, fun, and part of growing up and getting better. This year, you characterized victims of domestic violence as people who are in a tough marriage. Mr. Wilkinson, are you out of touch with struggling and vulnerable people?
Well, I've had a life of struggling myself, from coming to Canada as an immigrant with very little money, moving through the school system, delivering papers to earning pocket money, paying my own way through university. So I like to think I have some insight into what it's like to be a renter, since I did it for 18 years, going from one place to the next. I was referring to my own experience, which was messy. Moving 17 times in 18 years is very difficult. And on the issue of domestic violence, this has to be one of our highest priorities in our society, to make sure that women feel safe, that we have transition houses for them when necessary, that we're supporting their needs. And that's one of the reasons why we're supporting a very strong $10 a day daycare system for any family with an income less than $65,000, so that women, especially single women, can have guaranteed access to daycare so that they can get out in the workforce, move ahead in their lives, and have the autonomy that comes with having reliable daycare at an affordable price and the opportunity to be in the workforce. That's critical to who we are and where we need to go.
Thank you, Mr. Wilkinson. To you, Mr. Horgan, now your first question on this theme. Across BC, tent cities are becoming semi-permanent fixtures. What are you going to do to help people living in those tents and address the impacts on BC communities? You also have 1 minute.
Thank you. We were the first government in Canada to put in place a standalone Minister of Mental Health and Addictions. We brought forward modular housing, thousands of units to help people get out of tents and into homes. I mentioned AJ earlier on as a beacon, an example of how you can transform someone's life who's riddled with addictions and has significant challenges by giving them a home and giving them the services that they need. Making sure that we have social workers, psychologists, and other healthcare professionals there for people to make that transition out of the tent into a home and back into the community. These are daunting challenges. They didn't happen overnight, and they won't be resolved overnight, but we need to make a commitment each and every day. That's why having someone at the cabinet table that is only focused on those issues makes a transformative difference in the lives of individuals. Is it a challenge? Yes, it is. We have much more work to do.
Thank you, Mr. Horgan. Your next question. 5,000 people have died since the opioid crisis was declared a public health emergency in 2016. Dr. Bonnie Henry has long called for nurses to be able to prescribe pharmaceuticals as an alternative to toxic street drugs. And yet, it took until this pandemic for you to adopt her recommendations. Why so long?
We have been working with Dr. Henry, and her advice on the pandemic has been, on the opioid crisis has been stellar. We have worked on prescription alternatives to dirty street drugs. The pandemic has created a bigger problem. We had seen a decline in deaths from overdoses over time. They started to spike up again because of the pandemic. We had borders closed, so the toxic street drugs got worse. That's why we accelerated prescription alternatives. Mr. Wilkinson made some useful suggestions this summer during debate. We're hoping to incorporate that if we get the blessing of the people of BC to form another government. These challenges are profound, and we need to make sure that we're all working on it together. But it starts by making sure that all orders of government, federal, provincial, and municipal, understand that these are our brothers, our sisters, our neighbors, our co-workers who are struggling with addictions. They need our help, not our contempt. We need to focus on lifting them up and giving them the tools they need to recover. That's why we've tripled treatment beds since we came to government, particularly for young people.
Thank you, Mr. Horgan. Now, leaders, it's your turn to debate on social issues. This round, we're making a little change. You will have 15 seconds for the question, 30 seconds for an uninterrupted answer, and then 2 minutes and 15 seconds for free debate. As per the draw, Mr. Wilkinson begins with a question to John Horgan.
One of your cabinet ministers said recently that permanent tent cities are the right approach. Do you agree that having permanent tent cities is acceptable in Canada, and especially in British Columbia, Mr. Horgan?
I believe that the homelessness crisis grew by 30% between 2014 and 2017. It's been growing steadily, about 1% a year since then. Profound challenges that need our attention and our focus. I believe that we need to look at all of the options available to us. We've been moving people, we've been purchasing hotels, moving people into them, and making sure that they have services while they're there. These are disruptive events in people's lives. It's not easy to find yourself without a home and without a house. We need to make sure we give them our compassion, not our contempt.
Well, and that same cabinet minister referred to your rundown motels policy by saying you can't scoop people out of a park and put them in a rundown hotel and expect it to succeed. It's designed to fail. And yet that's what you persist in doing. We see it spilling onto the streets of Maple Ridge and Victoria and Vancouver, increasing street disorder, sadly increasing crime because the criminals are preying upon these people. I have said let's treat the causes and prevent the harm. And is there something in the way of treating people with schizophrenia? You treat them with a tent or a rundown motel. Why aren't we treating these mental illnesses? Brain injuries don't get treated with a tent or a rundown motel. So, Mr. Horgan, I'd challenge you by saying that your policy has been a colossal failure, and it's causing street disorder in towns all over British Columbia that nobody sees any end to until we have an implemented program like I've talked about of getting psychiatric nurses working with the police and increasing the number of police officers to fill the 200 vacancies that you left, so that we now have crime rates rapidly rising in Vancouver, Maple Ridge,
Mr.
and
Wilkinson,
Victoria.
let him respond.
I'm curious, Andrew, that as if this just started a couple of weeks ago for you, this has been a challenge in British Columbia for decades. The downtown east side is infamous around North America. We've been working diligently, as I suspect you were as well, to address these issues. We're looking at using the Riverview lands because the people of Coquitlam say we want this to be a haven, a sanctuary for people struggling with mental health, addictions, and other issues. That's how you create solutions, working with communities. Other communities like Vancouver and Victoria are looking at solutions that meet their needs. The province's responsibility is to make sure the resources are there for those communities and those people. We need to build up a system that was torn down over many decades, not over many weeks.
And these things need to be judged by their results. And we see the results on the streets of Kelowna, the streets of Kamloops, the streets of Vancouver and Victoria. It's not working, Mr. Horgan. So when do you stop stop pursuing a dead end? When do you stop hitting your head against the wall and do something constructive to treat the causes, to prevent the harm?
You need to help people.
You don't give them responsibility.
Let Mr. Horgan respond.
You don't have solutions, Andrew. If you had them, you would have implemented them in the 16 years that you had. The problem got worse, not better on your watch. I think it's rich for you to throw this back at Sonia and I, who for the past, for the past 3.5 years, we've been working together to solve these challenges.
All right, that's time for this segment. Now, Mr. Horgan with a question to Ms. Furstenau.
Yes, well, Sonia, I want to ask you about the challenges of accessing healthcare services in British Columbia. We've been building hospitals. We've been putting in place urgent primary care centers. We're going to hire another 7,000 workers to go into home care and long-term care. What solutions does the Green Party have to address the challenges of finding healthcare in British Columbia?
It's an absolutely essential question to be asking, particularly in a time like this when we recognize how important the health and well-being of people are in this province. We support the move towards more primary health care, as well as ensuring that every community has family doctors. Every person in this province should have that family care. We've also suggested in our platform that we incorporate mental health care as part of primary health care so that people can access mental health care without having the barrier of it being unaffordable.
You have time to debate, sir.
Yeah, well, and as the questions have demonstrated tonight, we come back to health care all the time here in British Columbia and in Canada because it separates us from our neighbours to the south. Public health care is fundamental to who we are as Canadians, and we need to make sure we're training enough people. Your platform talks about it. Our platform talks about a new medical centre in Surrey to train doctors, nurse practitioners, and other health care providers to make up for the deficit that built over the 16 years the BC Liberals were on the watch.
It was your deficit in doctors.
We need to make sure that we're not bringing back medical services premiums for these delivery of free services that are part of our citizenship. And I'm glad that we agree on this, Sonia. I'm comforted that we can continue to go forward over the next number of years to make sure that British Columbians get the services they deserve.
Well, I'm glad we agree on it, and we agree on many things. We don't agree on everything. But what we had was something unprecedented in BC for a very long time, which was parties working across party lines. I would point to the health regulation reforms brought forward by Adrian Dix, myself, and Norm Letnick, a fantastic example of what can be achieved when we work across all three party lines to put the public health, public trust, and public safety at the center of the work we do and not have partisanship and politicization in it. We should have been doing more of that. We had another year to continue doing that, and we could have been bringing forward all manner of excellent programs and services for British Columbians.
The challenges are not for the next few months, but for the next few years. And I believe that we need to put the politics behind us. You're absolutely right. I think we all agree on that. But I think people at home have seen tonight that there are profound differences between the three of us and our approach to British Columbians and how we want to make sure they're safe through this pandemic and that they can grow and prosper in the future. Having choices is what elections are about. Asking people what they think is never a bad idea. I'm glad we're here tonight talking about these important issues, and I think British Columbians are as well.
Oh, I think British Columbians want to know that once we're elected, we put aside our partisanship and we be the people that they elect us to be, which is putting our service to them first.
Thank you. And finally, Ms. Furstenau, you have a question to Mr. Horgan.
Thank you, John. When you called the election, it ended the review of the Police Act, which was looking at systemic racism. Do you think your government has done enough to address systemic racism in British Columbia?
I agree systemic racism is a critical problem in British Columbia and indeed across Canada and, in fact, North America. What we've seen in the United States is a wake-up call for all of us. And I think we've heard tonight that all of us agree that we have a responsibility as white leaders to make sure we're doing what we can to reduce systemic racism. That's why we put in place an all-party committee. It will be revived, I'm confident, regardless of the outcome of the election. I think all of us agree on that. That's how we make change in people's lives, by putting it on the table, having the discussion, and then making the changes people need.
I think it's interesting you were approached by the Black community to pass as a province the UN Declaration on the Decade of People of African Descent in 2017, and there was no progress made on that. Having made that declaration, had you passed that as a province, it would have actually brought services, funding, and benefits to the Black community in BC. I also look to the impacts that so many government policies have on Indigenous communities in this province, and the lack of urgency to recognize the systemic racism that exists in the relationship between the provincial government and Indigenous people in this province. We passed UNDRIP, and yet in the first session that we had after that, we did not see your government apply the lens that it was supposed to be applied with that piece of legislation. And we heard from First Nations and Indigenous people that they were not treated as equals in government-to-government relationships.
That is not Correct, Sonia. We agreed, all of us, to put in place a work plan, and that work is underway, has been underway, and will continue. A little thing called the global pandemic happened along the way, but despite that, officials in the government continue to work with the First Nations Leadership Council and other groups across British Columbia to make sure that the work that we all did together would be implemented and solidified, not just for a short period of time, but for the rest of time in British Columbia. That's what Indigenous peoples deserve, and I thought that's what we were all working on. I'm confident that there will be stumbles along the way. This is not perfect. Grand Chief Stuart Phillips said quite famously, reconciliation isn't for wimps. So we're going to make some mistakes, we're going to disagree, but the fact of the matter is we now have a table and a framework to work under. I'm very proud of that, and I know you are too.
I'm proud of the legislation being passed, and it was something that my colleague Adam Olsen put an enormous amount of effort and energy into ensuring that it was brought forward. But the work plan isn't sufficient right now, and the urgency to address systemic racism, both for Indigenous people and the Black community in this province, it doesn't seem to exist within your government.
I just disagree with you, Sonia. We've been working on this from day one. Ravi Kahlon did a profound amount of work on anti-racism. He's passed that on to Ann Kang, and we're going to continue that work for as long as we possibly can.
And that is time. That's it for that portion of the debate. And leaders, our time is almost up. So thank you, and let's get to closing statements. With the order by draw, Ms. Furstenau, you will make the first closing statement, then you, Mr. Wilkinson, and you, Mr. Horgan, after that. Each of you have a minute and a half. Ms. Furstenau, to you.
Thank you, Shachi, and thank you for this evening. It's been an enlightening debate. I hope that the people watching at home have found it to be informative and helpful in making their decision. I know that we're in a really hard time. All of you are facing pressures and challenges that could not have been imagined before this year. We've never lived through a global pandemic before. We've never had to face the experience of wondering if businesses are going to make it through the winter, if our small tourism operators who have built their families and their lives ensuring that we have somewhere to recreate in this province are going to make it. We have teachers who are worried about the conditions that they're teaching in. We have parents worried about their children and their safety in school. And we have long-term worries. Are we going to be able to pay our rent, our mortgages? What does the future look like? And then overlapping all of that is a climate emergency that we're in, that government over government over government has ignored the evidence, ignored the warnings, and gotten us to this place. We've had for 3.5 years an unprecedented level of cooperation in the BC legislature. It serves people well. The best thing in this election is not to hand power to any single party, but to ensure that we have the kind of collaboration and cooperation that puts the people and their needs first. And to achieve that, vote Green.
Thank you, Ms. Furstenau. To you, Mr. Wilkinson.
Thank you for having us, Sachi, and thank you for the people for watching. Families across British Columbia are really worried about financial ruin in the next year. We need to pull together. We need to work together to put BC back in gear. In the spring, I said in March, it was time for us to fight the virus, not to fight each other. And that worked in a trusting relationship for a while until John Horgan broke that trust. He decided to look out for himself by calling this totally unnecessary election when he and the Greens had another year in their working arrangement. You have to decide whether you can trust John Horgan when he's doing this purely for his own interests. But when we get through this, election, I'm hoping all of us can think about rebuilding BC. It's going to take effective, competent leadership to build British Columbia up again, to make it a place we're all proud of. We know that this can be the greatest place on earth, but we're all going to have to pull together. We're all going to have to make British Columbia our priority. We're going to have to invest in ourselves, in our families, in our kids, in our communities, because we will beat this virus. We will do it because we're really good at what we do. And after that, we're going to have to build ourselves up to make this the very best place in the whole wide world to grow up and have a family. You'll need to decide who you want to lead this recovery from the pandemic. And I do hope you'll choose the BC Liberal team. My name's Andrew Wilkinson, and I'm hoping for your support whenever you decide to vote in the next 11 days.
Thank you, Mr. Wilkinson. To you, Mr. Horgan, for the closing statement.
Thank you, Shachi, and I want to thank everyone at home for staying with us for the past hour and a half, and I want to thank my colleagues for a very civil debate about the issues that matter to British Columbians. No one thought in March that we would find ourselves in the midst of a global pandemic. There was no plan in place other than emergency preparedness activities that kicked in right away, and in BC, we're doing the right thing. We're working, following the guidance of Dr. Bonnie Henry, to make sure that everyone can be safe. And we've learned over the past number of months that even though we can't be together, we can still be there for each other. This election is not about the next few months, but about the next few years. And the question is quite clear. Who do you want to lead you, and where do you want to go? I believe that Mr. Wilkinson's plan is focused on making sure that there are rich get the biggest benefits, with $3 billion in tax breaks that you'll pay for with cuts to services that your family depend upon. I believe the job of Premier is to work for you. I believe that we have a plan in place that will do just that will make sure that we get out of this pandemic together, that we keep your loved ones safe, healthy, and secure. The plan will work because it's focused on you and investing in education, childcare, investing in health care, seniors care, all across the province. And also, to make affordability a little bit better, a $1,000 COVID benefit so you can get by the next number of months. The climate-leading plan that makes North America envy what we've been able to accomplish here in British Columbia. On the 24th of October, I hope you'll support the NDP candidate in your community. Thank you very much for the evening.
Leaders, thank you. Thank you for a respectful debate. Y'all get a cookie. Nice work. We're going to come back in a moment, but before we leave you, do stay with us. Those of you at home, we have a quick word now on how to vote in a pandemic.
This is an unprecedented election. It's estimated almost half of BC's 2 million voters plan to do so by mail. If you haven't requested your vote by mail package yet, please do so as soon as possible, because your ballot must be received by 8 p.m. on October 24th to be counted. The recommended deadline to mail your vote is October 17th, but if you are going to vote by mail after that, you can drop your ballot off at advanced polling stations, district electoral offices, or Service BC locations. Please check the Elections BC website for details. If you plan to vote in person, advance polls are open October 15th to the 21st. Check your voting card or elections.bc.ca for the polling station closest to you. COVID-19 safety protocols are in place at all polling stations. These include physical distancing, capacity limits based on the size of the location, elections officials wearing PPE, hand sanitizing stations, and frequent cleaning of those voting stations. So vote by mail as soon as possible, or vote in advance polls, or vote in person. But above all, make sure you vote.
And that is it for tonight, British Columbia. And for those of you watching in points beyond, we do hope that this debate has helped you get to know the leaders, the parties, the platforms. And again, we thank the leaders for a respectful debate tonight. We especially hope that it has served you well in deciding how to vote. Thank you. I'm Shachi Kurl.
Good evening, I'm Anita Bath.
And I'm Stephen Quinn.
All right, the leaders' debate for the 2020 BC provincial election just wrapping up. BC Liberal leader Andrew Wilkinson, BC NDP leader John Horgan, and BC Green Party leader Sonia Furstenau battled it out on stage for 90 minutes. The first and maybe one of the only opportunities to really introduce themselves to you.
And for the next hour, Anita and I will be with you, bringing you some much-needed analysis and breaking down the debate and how the leaders did. In a few minutes, NDP leader John Horgan will be answering questions from reporters. We will take you there live, and shortly after, we'll hear from other leaders as well.
We also want to hear from you, of course. We are taking your phone calls from around British Columbia this evening. We want you to tell us what you thought of tonight's debate. How did the leaders perform? Have you now changed your mind? Or perhaps you've gained zero clarity from tonight? Across the province, the number to call is 1-800-825-5950. In Metro Vancouver, the number is 604-669-3733.
And we are answering your questions on social media as well. You can tweet us or write your question in the comments section on the live stream of CBC Vancouver's Facebook page or CBC Vancouver's YouTube channel. But first, let's get to some of the highlights of tonight's debate.
Okay, joining us with their analysis is CBC's provincial affairs reporter, Tanya Fletcher. Hello, Tanya.
Hello. And
Gerald Beyer is an associate professor of political science at the University of British Columbia. Hello to you too. I guess I can look at you guys right here. Tanya, now it took a little while to actually get into tonight's debate. Some people on Twitter are saying it was very Canadian, almost a bit of a snooze fest. Is that your takeaway, or was there a big moment?
It was very tame, especially compared to the last debate we saw pointing stateside and was what some described as a circus between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. So definitely we didn't see that kind of explosive material, and it was interesting to watch, especially Wilkinson and Horgan try to show restraint in holding back. You could tell that John Horgan didn't want to bring out any of his Angry John monikers from debates past, and I think given the overall tone of this debate and that it was hinged on the circumstances in which we're having it during a pandemic, that they had to shift their tones accordingly, and you could tell there was some talking over each other, but overall it was quite tame. And you're right, it did take a while to get going. Andrew Wilkinson was up first. He looked a bit stiff. He sounded slightly nervous. He was trying to stick to some very practiced answers, and John Horgan as well. He started out with quite a mild tone and tried to keep that kind of mild and less aggressive approach. But Sonia Furstenau, I think, is really who shone through in this debate. She stands the most to gain in this debate because people don't know her as well. She needed this debate to raise her public profile, to give voters that kind of face-to-face opportunity to see not only who is Sonia Furstenau, but how is she different than her predecessor, Andrew Weaver? How is she going to change and steer the Green Party in a different and new direction to peel off some of those left-of-center votes in this election? And I think she really did come out with a strong message. She was commanding, she was focused, she was clear, and she did not get derailed as the most inexperienced of the three from the other two when they tried to take her off track and take her off message. So let's go to some of the clips I think that stood out in illustrating some of these points. First, let's throw to, I believe it is John Horgan up first, and I want to point out what he tried to do through much of the debate is pin the last 16 years of BC Liberal failures on Andrew Wilkinson squarely, and you heard that repeated as a trend and a pattern throughout the debate, and here's one of those moments.
You fired 10,000 people, largely women, to give a tax break to the wealthiest people in BC. Your former colleague, George Abbott, wrote a book about it. I commend it to your Christmas reading. It was the wrong thing to do. It focused on people who didn't need help and punished those who did. That doesn't build community, it doesn't build our economy, and it certainly didn't help seniors when the pandemic hit.
This is your recurring theme of creating this division amongst British Columbians of us and them.
So you heard it there, and that was again repeated throughout. John Horgan trying to bring up the past Liberal failures, and that's an NDP strategy as a whole throughout this campaign. They're trying to set people's memories fresh at 2017 and highlight the successes that the NDP has accrued over the past 3.5 years. Let's shift gears, look at Sonia Furstenau and what we were just talking about in her strength in coming out as the new and the fresh and the young leader of the three of them. And here's an example where she really didn't get derailed by the others in their back and forths.
We're here on the stage debating things when we should be in the legislature making sure people are getting what they need.
It's never a bad idea to ask British Columbians where they want to go and who they want to lead them.
It is a bad idea when you break an agreement and you break the legislation.
It was 3.5 years since the last election. That is an eternity with COVID-19.
I think what British Columbians need to understand is that you're willing to break your word, you're willing to break agreements, and you're willing to break legislation that you yourself passed in the legislature in order to put the interests of your party, in order to seek that power and that majority that you so want for obedience in the legislature.
And unsurprisingly, you saw there Sonia Furstenau again attack John Horgan for why are we having this darn election in the first place. And you know she's trying to capitalize on those bitter votes, maybe try to have that backfire on John Horgan. But beyond that, she's trying to attack his credibility and his trustworthiness. And I think she was very effective in a debate sense in standing up to the other two.
And over to you, Gerald Byer. Fairly calm debate. Did you see a clear winner emerge tonight?
It's hard to say if there's ever a clear winner. I think Furstenau certainly did make some strong points and definitely had a kind of calm demeanor, I think, that fit with the tone of the debate, but that gave her those powerful moments. So she certainly had that when talking about systemic racism. It's certainly in that clip we just saw. Maybe it suggests part of John Horgan's strategizing and tactics for holding an election soon is that he wants to kind of cut off her opportunity to get to know British Columbians better, because she might be a more formidable opponent a year from now when she's had the opportunity to have a fuller roster of candidates than the rest. And so she certainly did really well. What you would expect. I think Wilkinson was a bit on his heels because of issues that came up over the weekend, and I don't think he fully answered, I think, to many people's satisfaction, those kinds of questions about sexist remarks going on within the BC Liberal Party. So I think he had a slightly less strong performance, but maybe the star of the debate was the moderator keeping everybody in check and keeping everybody pretty calm and deliberative.
And Gerald, the question about unconscious bias really stood out to, well, many of us here. The leaders were asked how they have personally reckoned with their own white privilege as white leaders. Horgan didn't answer it about himself, instead pointing a finger at Andrew Wilkinson, even getting called out by the moderator for not answering the question. How much did this hurt him tonight, do you think?
Hurt Horgan or Wilkinson?
Horgan.
Yeah, I mean, I think trying to say that you haven't seen racism because you didn't see color when you were young. I mean, I think that doesn't resonate. I don't think as well as an answer about the putting oneself in the position of a mother having to tell somebody that they have to be careful out there. And I think Furstenau noting that we're all white and we can't answer that, I think was the more powerful answer for sure. I think this could hurt Horgan, but it doesn't hurt Horgan in the other sense that he has a very diverse set of candidates out there, perhaps more diverse than the Greens do, and I think that is the strength he'll want to rely on. That the Greens acknowledge that as a weakness, and again, it speaks in part to the kind of transition of the party that's been going on, and they've had to kind of reset the machinery of the party, but in the midst of an election.
I mean, that was a moment that was pretty jarring for me. And I think a lot of people, if you watch how this played out on social media tonight, Horgan saying, I don't see color.
Very much jumped out at people, especially when we were watching social media. It jumped out to me personally as well, because we don't hear that anymore.
No, and Tanya, how do you think that people are going to react to that?
Yeah, it was, to be honest, tone deaf is the way a lot of people are describing it. And it wasn't just Horgan, right? Wilkinson spoke about, and that was something else Wilkinson tried to bring up at every opportunity, if you notice, his medical background. His background as a doctor. I think we're in the middle of a global pandemic, so he is trying to push that point as much as possible. And he talked about, I think it was in that question and in the diversity and racism question where he brought up his past as a doctor and someone who came in actually named their baby after him. I believe it was an Indigenous family. And so, yeah, it was just a little bit of a stretch perhaps in some ways. And yes, Horgan talking about how he didn't see color and how he talked about his, growing up playing lacrosse. And so it just didn't really translate. It fell flat in a lot of ways. And I think Sonia Furstenau's answer was starkly contrasted to theirs, not just in the content of what she said, but in the way she delivered it. And I think we have kind of a montage now of all three of them in that moment, which I think really defined the whole debate, responding to that question. So let's take a look.
I then worked in Indigenous communities, Dease Lake, Lillooet, Campbell River, dealing with a lot of Indigenous people as patients. Got to know them, got to know their way of life, and I believe there's a young, maybe not so young man in Lillooet now who was named after me when I delivered that baby from his mother.
I believe that what we need to do is tell the stories of our diversity. That's why we've established a Chinese-Canadian Museum, so that the 150 years of participation in our culture,
Sir,
in our
with
society...
the 15 seconds left, this is a question about your own personal reflection.
We aren't all equal. I wish we were, but we're not. In this province, in this country, and around the world, the three of us cannot reckon what that's like because we are white. But we have to, in our roles, work to end that systemic racism.
So you hear there, even in the way they're communicating, I think Wilkinson and Horgan both kept the same tone, right? Their inflection, their pacing, the very, I guess, tangibles of the way they communicated stayed fairly consistent throughout all of their answers, no matter what the topic was. But you saw Furstenau really kind of feel each question and feel each answer and adjust her tone accordingly and her pacing. And that, I think, really caught the attention of people watching, and it really drove home how important this issue was and the passion that was there. So I think even in their style of answering the questions really came across and highlighted the stark contrast there.
Now, Jerry, if someone was undecided before tonight, do you think that this debate would change people's minds at all?
I mean, there was a lot of substantive policy discussion in the debate. I mean, I think that fit with the well-moderated tone of it, that it really did give everybody an opportunity to
Gerald, we're just
answer.
going to have to cut you off there for 1 second. NDP Leader John Horgan is about to speak, taking questions from reporters. You can see him now. Let's go to this live.
John Horgan is here, and our first question tonight comes from Binder Sajan.
Hi, John. I want to ask you about your answer to the question about your personal experience with privilege. You said you don't see color. Were you saying that you don't think you personally have any work to do?
Oh, not at all. And I certainly mischaracterized the challenges that people of color face every day. I was reflecting on my childhood, which is how I interpreted the question, and I was inappropriate to say I don't see color. I don't have a clue as a white person the challenges that people of color face every day. But I did grow up in poverty. I did grow up with Indigenous friends, South Asian friends, and for me it was normal to be poor and to be part of the crowd that nobody paid attention to. That was a mistake on my part. I have to work every day to improve on that, as do all leaders that aren't of color.
Our next question tonight comes from Richard Zisman.
Mr. Horgan, do you think it was effective when you continued to interrupt Andrew Wilkinson, saying that's not true, in a number of his answers?
Well, I think that the people at home need to know when my record and the things that I've been focused on are mischaracterized. That's the essence of the debate. Having said that, I thought it was a very positive experience, I think, certainly for the three of us and for people at home, because there wasn't a lot of talking over each other. I think Shachi Kurl did a really good job of moderating. I think it was a good night for British Columbia.
Our next question tonight is from Ian Bailey, Globe and Mail.
Mr. Horgan, was there any reason you didn't raise the issue of Ms. Thornthwaite's remarks about Beaumanoir in the debate?
Well, it was raised by the moderator. I felt that was sufficient. There's a range of issues that British Columbians are facing right now. The challenge is to make sure that people see the choices available to them and ask that question of where they want to go and who they want to lead them. Mr. Wilkinson took a few days to get an answer out. He was given an opportunity by the moderator. I felt that was sufficient. I wanted to make sure that I talked about the things that were not being discussed by the moderator, and that's why I asked the questions that I did.
Next question is from Glenn Korstrom, a business in Vancouver.
I didn't hear much on the economic recovery benefit tonight. I was just wondering why that was, and if you can concisely say why you think it's preferable to the Liberals' PST tax cut.
Well, we do have a PST reduction in our plan for machinery and equipment for businesses that are expanding or hiring new people. I believe that's a targeted tax cut that will benefit those businesses and benefit the economy. The COVID benefit is for families that are struggling to make sure that they'll turn that money back into the economy. People on middle and low incomes will not be going to tax havens with the $1,000. They're going to be going out to stores and other shops in their community to support small businesses. I believe that's much more stimulus than giving a blanket tax cut or tax break that the Liberals are proposing. If you want to buy a yacht, I'd vote for the Liberals. If you want to buy groceries, which don't have PST, you want to buy rent that doesn't have PST, you want to care for your child that doesn't have PST, that's not helping anyone. Putting money in people's pocket that will recirculate in the economy, I think that's good politics, it's good economics, and it's what we need right now when people are struggling.
Our next question is from Eva Eugene from Radio Canada.
Hi, Mr. Horgan. Leader Furstenau asked you many questions, criticized you for calling a snap election. How do you see things moving forward if you're required to work with the Greens in the next government?
My approach is to work with anyone who wants to work with me. The BC Green caucus and the NDP caucus worked very well together on many, many issues. We had disagreements. There are issues that I wanted to bring forward that we weren't able to, and I'm absolutely prepared to work with Sonia and her team in the future.
Thank you, everyone. That's all the questions we have tonight.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, we just heard from NDP leader John Horgan basically backpedaling right away, saying it was inappropriate for him to say that he doesn't see color, adding he doesn't have a clue about the challenges that people of color face every day.
And Gerald Byer, to you, was that one of the fastest walkbacks you've seen in the history of provincial debates?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a recognition that he's sort of an own goal there. He's got to backpedal on it. I mean, as I said before, I think he does have some of the advantage of having quite a diverse caucus already, and certainly having lots of candidates out there because it's a party that is likely to form government. And so it attracts a lot of good people to want to run. And so I think he has something to fall back on there. He can be sincere about it fairly quickly, but he clearly recognized it as a gaffe and something he had to adjust for.
Will be interesting to see how this plays out in the days to come, for sure. We want to take a phone call now. Let's go to Tom from Burnaby. Tom, what do you have to say?
Well, very compelling platforms for how we are best going to be helping British Columbians. But my question to the leaders is, how are we going to best quickly get these promised resources, whether it's the PST cut, the $1,000 from the NDP? How quickly is this going to come to British Columbians, especially as a young person? How are we going to have access to this in a quick turnaround time, and what are we expecting?
I think we could probably put that question to our legislative reporter, Tanya Fletcher, at this stage. Tanya, with what you've heard of the platforms, whether it's the PST cut or whether it's the promised $1,000 check that John Horgan and the NDP say that they're going to mail out, is there any timeline for how soon that money might be arriving in people's bank accounts?
Vaguely, if I recall correctly. It's funny, the goodies that are promised have a suddenly very quick timeline. The deficits that are punted down the road suddenly have a very long and generic timeline, if you kind of see how they managed to do that. But yes, as far as the PST cut goes, Andrew Wilkinson's kind of marquee promise of this campaign, he did say, I believe it would be immediately. So PST would be immediately. I believe John Horgan's $1,000 cashback would kick in right away as well. So those are two concrete things that we could expect to see quick delivery on, I think.
All right, Tanya, thanks for that. We are now going to go to Green Party leader Sonia Furstenau. She is about to take questions from reporters. She is standing by.
Sorry, Rob, we'll come back to you. We're going to start with Binder.
Hi, Sonia. I'm just wondering, when you heard the responses from the other leaders on the privilege question, you made a point of speaking about your personal experience, but what was your reaction to what the other two leaders had to say, and what message do you think it sends to other people who are looking for diversity in this group of leaders debating today?
Yeah, thank you, Binder, for the question. And, I think it's for them to reflect on their answers and to reflect on their privilege, and as I am trying very much to do, recognizing how important it is that we see and experience the world differently as white people than people of color and Black people and Indigenous people in this province and in this country. I think that it's incumbent on all of us to really reflect on how we can make change so that we have less systemic racism. We have to become anti-racist in everything we do. And I think a really important path forward for that is to ensure that there is anti-racism curriculum in our K-12 classrooms, so that we are raising a generation of young people and our future leaders who can understand the difference that it is to be a white person in society.
Next up, we have Richard Zussman, Global News.
Ms. Furstenau, I think a lot of people are commenting about how you were able to be vulnerable and also be the most effective in communicating your vision for the province tonight. How do you feel coming out of that debate? Do you think you accomplished what you needed to, and do you think this is the boost you need to potentially pick up some seats here?
You know, Richard, I'm really focused on what we need to be doing for the people of this province right now, as well as recognizing that every decision we make right now has to be leading towards a future that we can be proud of being part of right now, that we have to start delivering on both fronts so urgently. I'm glad that I had the opportunity to introduce myself to a lot of British Columbians. It's exactly 4 weeks and 1 day since I became leader of the BC Green Party, and it's been pretty much the busiest 4 weeks of my life. But I'm very committed to what we are putting forward as a vision for this province, recognizing that we have to help people in this moment we're in that is unlike any moment that we've ever been in as a province, and at the same time recognize the responsibility that we have to make decisions that will make the future more sustainable, healthier, and better for our children and grandchildren.
Next up, Eva Uguin from CBC.
Hi, Ms. Furstenau. You're talking a lot about the future that British Columbians need, and we're in the middle of a pandemic right now. What did you think of the other two leaders' plans for how to deal with the pandemic moving forward?
You know, I think that both of the other leaders in the other parties have good ideas for addressing the issue, the challenges that we and people are facing right now in BC. I think that we also have a lot of good ideas that focus on helping renters right now who are paying too much of their rent, too much of their income in rent, helping get mental health supports for people so that affordability isn't a barrier, ensuring that we are, our long-term care homes are delivering the care hours that they need to our seniors. And I think that what would serve us best in this province and in this time is to have all of our political leaders recognize that we have to act urgently together on these crises that we're facing. We have to stop letting partisanship erode our ability to solve the problems that people need us to solve right now, at the same time as recognizing that we have to be serious about understanding what the evidence tells us about the future that we need to build, that climate change is very significant and very real, and it is an emergency, that our biodiversity loss is impacting our health and our well-being, and that we have to have a generation of students who are educated in this province who aren't living in a sense of scarcity in their public education, schools and classrooms. There's a lot of work we need to be doing right now, very urgently. And I think the most important thing is that elected representatives start to recognize that we can listen to each other, hear the good ideas, and then work quickly and with urgency to put the solutions forward.
Just as a reminder to press *1 to queue for questions. Our next question is from Tim Ford, Victoria Buzz.
Good evening, Sonia. I'm so glad you were just talking about people listening to each other. It segues nicely into my question. We observed in the United States a debate between Kamala Harris and Mike Pence where, to be blunt, one person was not really listening to the other. And I think that gender played a lot into that. How do you feel tonight's debate went for you with regards to being listened to? Do you feel that your message was being heard?
I think overall, as Shachi Kurl indicated at the end, it was an overall a civil debate. People did listen to each other. There wasn't a lot of talking over each other. It's really important that we engage in political discourse in a respectful way. We're seeing the opposite of that in so many countries right now, and even here in Canada. And it doesn't serve anybody for us to be disrespectful with each other. It doesn't serve anybody for us to constantly be trying to tear each other down. We really do need to find a way to get into that legislature and recognize that we have to be in service. We have to be focused on the people that we represent, And we have to be making decisions with an urgency and setting aside partisanship as much as we can as we move forward and serve the people of BC.
BC Green Party Leader Sonia Furstenau's post-debate remarks. And Gerald, to you, if I can, we are, well, perhaps not surprising that, again, the first question was asking her to react to what NDP Leader John Horgan had said again about not seeing color. That's an issue. Do you think that's going to dog him out of this?
I mean, it's possible. I think there are lots of things going on, of course, lots of things going on in terms of that file, if you want to call it that. But also, you know, there's a lot of concerns out in the province. I mean, as she answered other questions, I think she demonstrated, you know, you can pivot from almost any question to talk about schools, to talk about climate change, to talk about Indigenous issues. We saw a little bit of that overall in the debate as well, I think. And so I think we'll probably see quite a lot of an opportunity, or quite a lot of attempts to pivot from that by Mr. Horgan, if that's where the tone goes, because there are a lot of things that people want to talk about. I mean, I think it is an important one for sure, and I think it was a powerful moment in the debate. But I think there will be a lot of desires to talk about other things also.
Thank you, Jerry.
This may dominate, though, just even watching social media right now, it seems to be the thing that people are talking about. So what are you talking about at home? If you have thoughts on the debate, please give us a call. We'd love to hear from you. How did your leaders perform? Have you now changed your mind, or have you gained no clarity at all? Across the province, the number to call is 1-800-825-5950. In Metro Vancouver, the number is 604-669-3733. We're also seeing lots of visitors online at CBC Gem, YouTube, and Facebook. Lots of reaction coming in. I want to read you one comment. This one is from Pinana. Anyone notice how much more respectful this is than anything related to U.S. debates? I want to go to Tanya on this question. Tanya, what are your comments on that? Is it just simply that we're Canadian, or is it that the issues are a little different here? What's going on?
I think it is. I mean, a little bit is. I mean, American politics are very different in many ways than Canadian politics. So I think it's not a surprise that we didn't see, like we said, the circus-style debate that we saw just recently in the States. But I think too, it was the tone of looking who was talking and what they needed to gain and lose. Horgan couldn't have any major missteps, right? He's going into this way ahead in the polls, and he basically, his whole strategy is don't rock the boat. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So he didn't really have anything to prove in the sense that just maintain and don't screw up. Now, will that moment that you talked about come back to haunt him? And if so, to what degree? Will that translate into voter backlash? Those are all questions we'll have to see yet. But Wilkinson as well, you saw him a little bit mechanical, a little bit rehearsed. And I think just as a person, he's very cerebral. He's very academic. You know, he's a doctor and a lawyer. And so I think he was trying to stick to the script. He had very rehearsed and prepared answers for many of the topics. And so it was a large focus on the policies, right? And so I think in that sense, it was hopefully valuable for voters, and not only getting to see their personalities, but to see some substance of what they were pitching pulled from their platforms. And then Sonia Furstenau as well, like that's just not her leadership style. And sitting down with her recently and seeing her kind of develop as a politician through the legislature as an MLA in the past 3 years, she's never been about that. And I think she maybe even had a calming presence on the other two, and nobody really started to escalate the other past the point of no return. And so it was the dynamic between all three of them, and also, as we mentioned, just kind of the tone of this election that we're in the midst of a pandemic. Nobody really wanted to be, you know, that person to send it into a tailspin. And the moderator, to her credit, right, Shachi Curl did an excellent job keeping them in line, and even extending time at certain points to the leaders when she said blatantly, you didn't answer the question, I'm going to give you 10 more seconds to try and get it right. In that sense. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting as we go from here to see how the voters will react to this debate, whether it was informative enough to change anyone's minds. And keep in mind, this whole leaders debate, I mean, the televised leader debate is the marquee event of any campaign, right? Looking at most elections, but even more so this one, twofold, because this election is about the pandemic and about leadership. Which leader is best poised to lead the province through the rest of the pandemic. So even more so, it's about leadership, and the televised leaders debate is when you see that come through, when they're able to showcase and display their leadership styles and personalities, but also because of the nature of this campaign, because they've been handcuffed to essentially their computer screens. They haven't been able to connect face-to-face with voters, and that made it even more critical tonight for them to get that kind of personality injections in.
And Tanya mentioned there the moderator, Shachi Kurl. She really has been sort of the star of the evening tonight for sure.
And we do have some calls. We are taking your calls this evening, and we'll go to Carolyn in Victoria. Good evening to you, Carolyn.
Good evening.
Your comments or questions?
Yes, thank you. The question asked here is how did they perform? They all performed very well. I'm just worried, everybody performs, but will they deliver? I was really grateful. It was a civil, intellectual, respectful debate. But what disturbs me is that the bigger issues weren't discussed. So,
right. Carolyn, my apologies. I'm going to have to leave it there as we have Liberal leader Andrew Wilkinson approaching the microphone for his post-debate comments. And we'll get to Mr. Wilkinson right now.
Well, yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, go ahead. You can go ahead and give your remarks, Andrew.
Oh. Well, it was quite a debate. I thought it was constructive and thoughtful. The interruptions were kept to a minimum, and it was a process of us getting our story out to the general public in the most effective way. What we have to do, of course, is portray our view of what British Columbia's pathway needs to be, and I thought the opportunity was there to do that. I thought it was a very constructive relationship with Ms. Furstenau from the Green Party, very thoughtful questions and thoughtful answers on all sides. And Mr. Horgan and I have to have some disagreements, and I think that was done in a respectful and orderly way, and so I hope it was useful to voters.
Okay, great. We will go ahead to questions. Just a reminder to press *1 to get in a queue. We'll go to Richard Sussman. Go ahead, Richard.
Do you think there was a moment there, Mr. Wilkinson, that stood out for you where you were able to deliver what many will describe as a knockout punch to convince voters that you can better serve British Columbians than John Horgan can?
Well, I'm rather humble about those things and not wanting to claim credit for a victory. That's up to the people of British Columbia to decide, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of talk about that in the next few days. But I think we did get across our core messages about the need for an economic plan for British Columbia, including cutting sales tax, including $10 a day daycare for everyone who needs it, including reforming ICBC, including infrastructure spending. Those are the things we need to get across and communicate to people, and I think that came across well this evening.
Great, thanks. We'll go to the next question. Eva Eugen from Radio Canada. Go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Wilkinson. There's chatter on social media now that your response in terms of relating to renters came off as a bit tone deaf and didn't connect with what renters' experience is now in spite of what your own experience was. What's your response to that?
Well, I have trouble seeing the world through their eyes now because I haven't been a renter for some time. So you have to be very respectful and listen. What we do know is that rents in Metro Vancouver are up by about $2,000 per year for the average renter since the NDP took office. That's an alarm bell to me because it means there's not enough supply of rental housing. We've got to get more supply of rental housing out there so renters have a genuine choice. It's not easy. And the idea that you'd be stuck in a rental place with rising rents is very challenging. And so we've got to make sure there's enough choice for renters by expanding the supply of dedicated rental buildings that won't be converted into condominiums.
Sounds good. And our last question of the night will go to Tim Ford from Victoria Buzz. Go ahead, Tim.
Good evening, Andrew. Thanks for sticking around. I just wanted to ask about a question that was brought up by the moderator as a point where you didn't give a direct answer, specifically regarding protesters around pipelines. I wanted to ask if you wanted to clarify your position on that. How exactly would you prevent protesters from accessing these areas?
Well, the pipeline proponents, apart from Trans Mountain, which is a federally owned project, are private companies. And if they have concerns, as they did on the Coastal GasLink facility in the north, their task is to go to the courts and ask the courts for an orderly process to resolve the protests. Let's be clear, though, the right to protest in a peaceful and orderly fashion is a constitutionally protected one. But there is no constitutionally protected right to be obstructive or destructive, and that's where the courts come in, and everybody has to follow the rulings of the courts, obviously.
Great, and thanks everyone for sticking around. That's all the time we have. Have a great night. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Andrew Wilkinson there coming out seemingly proud of his performance, but also noting that everybody sort of played nice tonight. Asked, though, Gerald, about being out of touch with renters. How did he do on that response?
I mean, I think it's really tough. He pointed to then, I haven't been a renter, so of course I can't. He kind of signaled his privilege there right away as a way of not really understanding. He said he had to be respectful, and then he was able to fall back on his talking points about rents going up under the NDP, and so he could kind of, we heard that message certainly during the debate. I mean, I do think if he tried to distinguish himself, I think on the latter question about protests and potentially law and order, I think he talks about courts, but the courts don't enforce those orders. It's the police, and so he's essentially inviting those kinds of conflicts potentially where those protests are, and it's fitting with the sort of law and order theme he has to some degree in terms of more resources for police and the rest. So I think that's certainly one of the distinguishing characteristics between the parties, and I think he hit that one home, and certainly people can understand that as a difference between the NDP, the Greens, and the BC Liberals.
And thanks, Jerry. And Tanya, I'm wondering what you make of Wilkinson's remarks, especially considering that did he do anything to get rid of the idea that he is somehow out of touch, that he does have a lot of privilege, which is a perpetual complaint we hear about him from critics?
I don't think there was any grand effort to remove those notions, but you just look at the physical, I don't want to say appearance, but the physical demeanor, comparing John Horgan just now with Andrew Wilkinson when they came out for their post-debate scrums, and perhaps their faces said it all. John Horgan, I thought, looked very deer in the headlight, almost scared because he knew the questions that were coming, and when he admitted he misinterpreted or mischaracterized his answer to that question about the race and diversity question. But if you saw Wilkinson come out, he was all smiles. He looked almost relieved, and so maybe that also plays into the sense of, does he realize where maybe he didn't hit it out of the park, or there was some missteps on his part too, and does he even realize that is the bigger question. And so I think their demeanor is just coming out of this was quite telling in and of itself. But I think the BC Liberals, they really needed a moment tonight to shift the momentum and actually start gaining some momentum in this campaign, because so far, they lobbed some pretty big promises out there in terms of policy and the PST and even wedge issues like the Surrey policing, right? They said that they're going to have a referendum on that. And so I think they've been trying to find these issues where they can really peel away some voters and draw a hard line in the sand where they can differentiate themselves. Andrew Wilkinson, he was brought it up there with the crime and the homelessness and the addictions, and how he's kind of conflated those things over the course of the campaign, and yet he's trying to strike also that more compassionate tone, and he outrightly admitted that to me when we had our one-on-one interview. He said, I know that there are some key writings out there that are largely driven by socially driven issues, and so he needs to find a balance to play to his base and cracking down on law and order in that sense, but he's also trying to find a way to play to the compassion of these situations and the complexity and the different layers that involve them, right, with the mental health issues, but he's lumping them all together in kind of one blanket or one banner problem. Could serve as a problem to him, and it'll be interesting to see whether he can kind of separate those things out and really attract votes in that sense to win over those voters on those specific issues within the larger issues.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. You are listening and watching our post-debate analysis on CBC Radio 1 across BC, also online. If you have thoughts on the debate, please give us a call. We'd love to hear from you. How did your leaders perform tonight? Has anything changed in terms of your opinion in the parties and who you're going to vote for? Across the province, the number to call is 1-800-825-5950. In Metro Vancouver, it is 604-669-3733. We're also seeing a lot of visitors online. I want to go to a comment right now. Let's go down to this from Valea. Valea says, doesn't Horgan know you don't say, I don't see color? So we were just talking, Tanya's talking about all these issues that Wilkinson is putting under one sort of blanket here, but perhaps there's going to be a little bit of a distraction from that because, again, we keep coming back to this Horgan comment.
It really was the phrase that, as I was typing out notes, it was the thing that I put in bold capitals with, stars all around it to mark it as probably one of the most significant things that was said in the debate. We are taking your calls around British Columbia this evening, as we said, and we're going to go to a call right now. We'll hear from Derek in Penticton. Derek, good evening to you.
Good evening.
Your question or comment?
Yeah, I was thoroughly impressed by Sonia. I've been a supporter of the NDP for the last 12 elections, and I find myself wavering. She's been in the job 4.5 weeks, and she is very eloquent and very well spoken on TV. My question to her is, there are 4,500 paramedics and dispatchers around British Columbia, and 5/8 of those are in rural or remote regions, and they currently are being paid $2 an hour to carry a pager and get paid by the call. Some of the areas like Midway might do 1 or 2 calls a week. What are her plans to help support those people to keep workers in that community and give them a working wage?
Derek, we appreciate that. And since we don't have Sonia Furstenau with us at the moment, I do want to throw this over to our panel, though. And Tanya, to you first. Our caller, Derek, first mentioned that he was impressed with Sonia Furstenau. What kind of impression do you think she left overall? This is her 4th week on the job. This is her very first leaders' debate. Overall, how do you think she did? Did she exceed expectations?
Absolutely she did, and I think of all of the 3 of them, if there was to be a winner, I think looking at expectations going into it, I think Sonia certainly was the winner in that sense. She came out clear, focused, commanding. She stuck to her message track but didn't sound prepared or rehearsed. She was passionate in her answers, and I think she really connected with voters in that sense, and that's so key, right? This televised leaders debate is really the best chance she's going to get to have that kind of mass appeal and ask people, who is Sonia Furstenau compared to Andrew Weaver, right, her predecessor. And there have been internal cracks within the Green Party since Andrew Weaver stepped down as party leader. Some of that was public, some of that was internal. But, I asked Sonia last week, is that going to hurt you as a Green Party? Because Andrew Weaver was so popular to so many people, and he really did elevate the party to where it was when he left. And so she doesn't think so. And her challenge now and her purpose now is to steer the Green Party in a new direction. How will the leadership under Sonia Furstenau look different under the leadership of Andrew Weaver? She's going to need to put kind of her personal stamp on that, her image on this party. And she's going to do that by trying to broaden the issues beyond just climate issues and the environment, right? And I think that will be key. You heard that tonight too. She talked about, even in her post-debate scrum there, she was asked about climate change, I think, and she steered it towards, rent, mental health supports, education, and so certainly a lot of socially driven issues as well. But she's trying to position the Green Party as the ones who can come forward for young people as well and really broaden that tent. But on the issue of diversity, we can't let Sonia get off too easy on that issue either, because the Greens have struggled with diversity in their party, not just party members, but voters as well. And, largely, the Green Party has attracted largely Caucasian voters and geographically specific to Vancouver Island. So they have admitted, the Green Party itself, before they even launched this leadership campaign and this leadership race, is that was their goal, was to broaden their horizons of the party beyond Vancouver Island and to try to attract more diverse candidates and try to appeal to more diverse voters. So that is still a challenge for the Green Party. How can they broaden their tent beyond those demographics? And that will be the challenge for Sonia Furstenau. And can she have enough time to make that pitch in the 3 weeks she's been as party leader when this election was called? That, by the way, probably no coincidence either. I think someone alluded to it off the top that John Horgan called this election knowing that the Greens would essentially be caught flat-footed because Sonia Furstenau was just a baby as the party leader. So.
And an especially short campaign period for her, no doubt.
And you talked there about being able to attract a diverse set of candidates. Well, perhaps this debate was the way for Sonia to get a little bit more of that attention. I had a lot of people texting me saying they were really impressed with her performance tonight. And these are people who would not normally, even look twice at the Greens. Gerald, what do you think about that? Is this sort of her jumping off point in terms of gaining that traction?
I mean, I think it is. I think time is short, though, as Stephen points out. And I think there are also some structural issues that the Greens run up against. I mean, one clearly is the electoral system. Tanya pointed to the geographic focus on Vancouver Island. That was intentional in 2017 because it was where they had the opportunity to win a few seats. I'm not sure that they have much growth beyond that this time around because they have to sort of focus on winnable seats to be able to be in there. And we have to remember how unique 2017 through 2020 is. We've forgotten almost because we're so obsessed with how weird 2020 is. But 2017 was this unbelievably close riding. Stephen and I were in the studio until well after midnight trying to figure out what was going to happen. And it took a couple of weeks after that to happen as well. And so, the circumstances that have made the Greens effective in the legislature over the last 3.5 years aren't necessarily the ones we would normally see in a BC election. I mean, I think her tone was very good, and it really kind of took some of the polarized spirit out of BC politics. We tend to think of BC politics as quite polarized between this free enterprise coalition, whether it's Socreds or the BC Liberals and the NDP. But they did find a sort of middle ground to take as the Greens in the last legislature. I don't know that those circumstances are going to exist again. I think what will be the real test of that kind of influence is what happens when you're in a majority government territory and you're trying to exert that kind of tone and influence on a government that has the votes, that doesn't necessarily need to consult the way that the BC NDP had to over the last 3.5 years. And
John Horgan certainly hopes to find out what that feels like in the next little while, I'm sure. Thank you, Gerald. Lots of comments coming in from you online this evening. Yasmina comments. She says, Wilkinson's got some nerve. How can we trust the BC Liberals? Your party caused nothing but harm over a 16-year period, pillaging ICBC and others along the way. And Jason commented on YouTube and said, BC Liberals turned ICBC into a cash grab by balancing the budget on the backs of drivers. And that issue of ICBC persists for the BC Liberal Party.
For sure, really is a theme in these comments that we're getting. Steve Foster also writes, Liberals have no right to complain about ICBC. They ruined it. So let's put this ICBC question to Tanya and Gerald. Tanya, let's start with you once you're back up. We'll come back. Oh, there you are. Tanya, how did the BC Liberals handle the topic of ICBC today? And were you surprised at how little it dominated, I guess?
In a way, yes. I mean, Andrew Wilkinson, it has been his pet topic. Listening to him in the legislature over the past 3 years is ICBC, and yes, the dumpster fire that it was named under the NDP. But of course, they don't want to draw too much attention to it because you go back to the BC Liberals and how that all got into a messy situation in the first place. So Andrew Wilkinson knows that he can't speak too much about the past on that because the Liberal record will just get brought up every single time, like you saw John Horgan point to almost every single time. But you do see as well, Wilkinson's trying to point ahead, and he tries to shift the focus every time ICBC comes up to having this kind of privatized version of for auto insurance and allowing, to open up the market and have competition and all of those things that we see kind of right of center parties harp on in that sense as well, to open up competition. So I think it wasn't that surprising that we saw, him mention it, but perhaps it's also not that surprising that we didn't hear more about it.
Gerald, I recall having many conversations with then Finance Minister Colin Hanson about ICBC and about the fact that the BC Liberals were using it as a little bit of an ATM or as a cash cow. And he always insisted, well, that's only from the optional part of it. We only took those hundreds of $1 million out of the optional insurance, not out of the basic insurance. In the end, did that make much of a difference to ICBC?
Well, I mean, I think it is a big corporation, and that's part of the challenge is how well it was managed through that time and how well it could be managed if some of that revenue dried up. I think the reckoning still really hasn't come, in part because COVID has reduced our driving. It's reduced a lot of the claims that have happened. If the economy gets fired back up, I think the reckoning for both parties, in a sense, because it still is kind of the legacy of the BC Liberals to have to reckon with. But it's also, once you've owned it for 3.5 years, as the NDP have now, well, if it's broken, how have you fixed it. And I think it's probably a little bit of an issue that neither wants to touch in that regard. I think it does fit with the ideological position of the BC Liberals to say we want some other options. They've been talking about that for a while. I think that would take away some of that extra money that they relied on in that time. But certainly, I think it's one of those issues that is very clearly a pocketbook issue for lots of people. When renewal time comes around, people notice it. But I think the COVID has actually given them a little bit of a break on that reckoning. But it could certainly come back when the economy fires up again and people are driving a lot more.
All right, thanks, Gerald.
Well, it seems that way. You would have thought that ICBC would have been one of the major hot topics of this election, but it really hasn't been coming about as much as one would have thought. Let's go now to another caller from Vancouver. We have Sam Casaria. Hello, Sam. What did you think of tonight's debate?
Yeah, good evening. Pretty interesting debate today, although there's some topic that concerns me, including housing. It's pretty unaffordable. My question to all the politicians is that housing has transitioned into a commodity rather than a place of shelter to raise your family. So why not cap the number of homes a person could buy to 1 or 2? Because I know folks who own 10 homes. I know a couple who owns 11 homes, and 5. I've seen folks own like 2 to 3 homes. And then also they say supply is the issue. Supply is not the issue. The supply is controlled. And Alberta, actually, they build about 28,000 homes per year, and BC is building around 10,000. That's only a drop in the bucket. And why not make rent tax deductible just like Manitoba so it helps the renters? And lastly, it's families who make less than 100,000 per year. Sadly, they will be just mere renters. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Sam. And I guess we can put this to our panel as well, which is lots of talk about housing tonight, but depending on who you hear from, it's whether the cost of home ownership is too high or whether there are enough rentals. And
well,
Tanya,
you really saw, Horgan and Wilkinson going at this, blaming each other back and forth. Nobody wants to take responsibility here.
And Tanya, when we hear John Horgan talk about rentals, we had the rental rebate that was promised in the last election that never arrived. He talked about in this debate about homeowners getting a grant, and the renters deserve some relief. Again, is that a promise we ever expect to see fulfilled?
Well, yes. I mean, that's the other thing is Horgan will go back on these issues like daycare as well and blame it on the Greens for not fully supporting them with passing legislation on that front. But the $400 renters rebate, again, yes, you're right. We're seeing a deja vu of the 2017, marquee election promise then, never fulfilled. It's back on the table again now. So that is fair criticism. Will this ever come to fruition? And if so, when? Because we didn't see it in the last 3.5 years. So the NDP, I think, is taking a lot of flack on that. And also because housing prices, you heard Carol James over the years, over and over as finance minister say, we're cautiously optimistic that the market is moderating and it's doing what it's supposed to and kind of correcting. But we started to see prices go back up. And so you can't really look at the NDP, what they've done, and see it make a significant difference overall. And I think a lot of people, that's reflected just out on the streets saying, yeah, rent and housing and home prices are still a major concern for many people. It was interesting to see the Liberals try to capitalize on that with their full platform that was released this morning. Again, it got overshadowed by other issues and the debate today, so kind of got swept up in the dust. But one of the points, and I'd have to pull it up to read the exact details, but it was kind of interesting, is that they said they would offer incentives to municipalities to be able to create the capacity or build more affordable housing. So it's interesting to see the Liberals spot that as perhaps a weak spot and try to turn that around in their favor. They also said on this speculation and vacancy tax, they said that hasn't been effective for a lot of people. It's targeted some, but not the general population as a whole. So the Liberals are saying they would get rid of the speculation and vacancy tax in favor of some kind of capital gains tax, but we have yet to see kind of details on what that would look like or how it would be unrolled.
And something that Andrew Wilkinson has taken a lot of criticism from John Horgan, which is, of course, getting rid of that speculation tax, which we're supposed to imagine has put millions of dollars into provincial coffers at this point.
Well, and housing prices increased significantly under the Liberals, but they really tried to put that onto the NDP today and continually said, rent prices have gone up $2,000 under the NDP. Gerald, did the Liberals do a good job? Were they effective at trying to turn that around and put it on the NDP when it comes to the cost of housing?
I mean, I think he's tried to say that that the NDP hasn't really come up with a magic bullet for a really, a problem that existed before the 2017 election that continues to exist now. It's such a multifaceted problem too. I mean, when we talk about housing, what are we talking about? Are we talking about housing the homeless? Are we talking about middle class housing? Are we talking about affordable housing for workers? Are we talking about housing that stops people from having to commute long distances? There's so many things. It's such a complicated issue to try to deal with. I think it's on the minds of a lot of people, but I mean, you can see how it sort of rolls out of control. Wilkinson started talking about the increase in condo insurance prices. I'm not sure that condo insurance prices are any government's blame, but it's one of those things that does matter, and it speaks to a lot of people in those kinds of situations who are seeing those spikes. And so I think you can reach a lot of voters by talking about housing, but you can also alienate a lot of them if you do it the wrong way. And so I was, like Tanya, surprised. I think I texted you, wow, he's talking about the rental rebate again, even though it's the most prominent unfulfilled promise of the 2017 NDP. He can try to blame it on someone else, but if he had been determined to do that, I think that they very much could have. And so, fool me once, and so we'll see what renters think about that this time around.
Gerald, thank you.
And still a lot of reaction coming in online, including this comment from Danny Ramadan. It's funny, we keep talking about I don't see color as if this is somehow new to the three parties. The Greens are mostly white men candidates, BC Liberals as well. The BC Liberals and NDP haven't had the best record with people of color support, such as Indigenous and Black communities, as well as immigrants from the Middle East. Now, again, I know I keep saying that we come back to that, but it's like we go to ICBC, we come back to race. We go to housing, we come back to race. So this is not going away at all. And I think we have another caller.
We do indeed. Kevin Hong is calling us from East Vancouver. Hello to you, Kevin.
Hello. First of all, let me just say that my fiancée Anna and I love your morning shows. And to the point of the debate tonight, I was all set to vote for John Horgan, just primarily as a vote against Andrew Wilkinson's, quite obvious ploy to buy votes. But Sonia Furstenau's performance has really changed my mind on it. Her empathetic and compassionate view on social justice really hit home. And I thought, that's exactly what we need, more now than ever. And I'm to her point that why break up something that was working well? They had a great power sharing agreement, something that BC has never seen before. Why disrupt now? And John Horgan's answers on that particular question didn't quite ring true. It did sound almost as if it was a power grab.
Right, and we heard Sonia Furstenau talk a lot about the relationship with the NDP. We've also heard a lot of commentary, as our caller just said, about the empathy and about the compassion that she's shown.
And we want to just go to Gerald and Tanya for final comments here. We've got about 30 seconds each. Tanya?
Yeah, I think playing off what that last caller just said, that will be interesting to see if Sonia Furstenau really did come through as the clear winner in tonight's debate. Is it going to peel off enough, perhaps left of center votes from the NDP, where in some key ridings, those could count very much if it's as that caller said, an ABW, anybody but Wilkinson. If Furstenau is suddenly an option where they would have otherwise voted Horgan, it'll be really interesting come election night to see how those results will translate.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to those last few ridings. I mean, we saw in 2017 how it was just a few targeted ridings that really made the difference. In the end, the presumption when you have a higher vote share for the NDP going in is that they might be in a bit more comfortable territory. But if you chip away, those 400, 500 seat wins can be a real problem if it's a three-way race in some cases rather than the other way around. So if it's a three-way race, it could be a much more interesting night on 24th.
Gerald Byer, Tanya Fletcher, thank you so much. And this concludes our coverage of the BC Leaders Debate. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for your calls and for your tweets and messages. Thank you to our panelists tonight, CBC Provincial Affairs reporter Tanya Fletcher, UBC political scientist Gerald Byer.
And of course, we have much more coverage online and tomorrow on Stephen's show. October 24th is Election Day. Mark it on your calendar. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Have a wonderful evening.